So the home is on the market. It's sold. You guys are, remove all contingencies. So
Yes.
When's the sale date?
So we have to be out of here June 18th.
Okay. And then you're moving into another place for a month?
Yeah, exactly. So what we did is we set up short-term. Well, I can't even call it a rental because Mammoth doesn't have short-term rentals anymore. The market here is just too insane. So we have friends, thankfully, that are second homeowners, and they're not here right now. So we'll stay there until we make the move. We have a couple offers going on up in Montana. But
if you guys get into a bind, we always have our place that you're more than welcome to. I mean, it sits vacant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like my brothers go up during ski season, and I think like maybe 4th of July and a couple holidays, but for the most part, and we don't rent it out.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so for years we kind of did a rental, and then we ended up like going up there one time, and there was all this weed and like stuff, and we were just like,
dude,
it's good, we're fine.
Yeah,
not that I'm against people smoking weed, but I just like I don't want to bring my kids up there and like have to go like some dude leads a fat sack in like all these chronic magazines. I'm like, I just don't want to explain this to my kids.
No, and that's the thing. Like, you don't want to get stuck having to clean up. Like, where we live here, the vast majority of the people in the area are, Airbnb or VRBO or whatever it is now. And, it's 50-50. Like, right now it's all fishermen down on Crowley Lake that are in their mid-50s, right? So, they roll up in their pickup truck and they got, 48 beers, a couple handles of whiskey, and they're going to be here for about 5 days. But during the ski season, it's a much different clientele. And everybody, say right now, the place next door might have 2 people renting a 3-bedroom. In the winter, that same 3-bedroom is probably going to have 11 people in it.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a totally different environment. And, and like influencers in the wild, right? So I remember looking out my window this winter.
One of my favorite Instagram pages.
It's so amazing, right? And that's what it was. I looked out, it was snowing, and it was a chick in a bikini, probably, I don't know what it would be, 18 degrees out. She's in a bikini, like sculling a beer, standing in the snow in a pair of boots. Well, somebody was shining a flashlight on her to give like the snowflakes that glittery fall sensation, and they're filming her. And I'm like, okay, so this will probably go onto Instagram. She might even have a few 100,000 followers. But from my perspective as the dude drinking water at his kitchen sink, it is a hammered chick standing in the parking lot of an apartment complex while a dude is shining a flashlight and a guy's filming her with a cell phone. Like the contrast to realities, it's just like, and then runs inside frozen to the bone, right? Like shit-faced, So it's like when you look at that though, you're just like, Jesus, it's all a facade. Like the big facade we have now, like, for people that don't realize, and John knows this obviously, but like, I don't remember learning how to ski. Right. So for me, like people are like, oh, that guy skis quite a bit. And it's like, well, yeah, but I also kind of did track and field. Right. You know what I mean? So it's like skiing to me is a sport that like I do, I do it well. Like I ski really well and I've skied for a long time. So for me, it's not like a big process. It's not like, I get to go skiing for my 2 weeks or 2 days of the year. So what we started to see, for example, up here at the mountain is during the pandemic, especially, which I know we're going to get into because this place is a shit show, but everybody gets up to the top of the mountain here, they spent exorbitant amount of monies to get there. And they literally, we saw this all winter, standing at the top of a mountain, 3 or 4 people taking the photo. And then they literally white knuckle panic, fear, like shit their pants, slide down to a safe spot, and then get off the mountain and go drink over and over and over. And you're like, none of these people are committed to the mastery of anything physical anymore. They just spend a bunch of cash to take a photo and then try to figure out how to make it look like the coolest weekend on Instagram. It was a weird year, to say the least.
So it's almost like people are just doing it for the gram. I mean,
100% for the gram. So the top of Cornice, as you know,
I was going to say when people are at the top of Cornice, Like normally we would get up there and then the wind kind of gusts. And the longer you stand up there, the colder and shittier it gets. So we would just literally ski off and just go off. And 99 out of 100 times you were okay. But then occasionally there'd be somebody who was nervous to jump off and like trying to like snow slide, kind of side slide down. And we would 100%. Literally fucking hit those people constantly. And we're like, dude, just jump off. It's only like a 3-foot lip. You'll be fine.
You'll be fine. Well, I'll do you one better. They went and plowed the cornice right off of that. They don't let it form anymore.
Oh, really?
And so now it's not a hard run to ski other than being high and windy. And so what everyone does now is they take the gondola up because they're too scared to take the chair up to 23 because you actually have to ski. And then so what they do is they all crowd the top of cornice and they take photos, like tons and like just like 30, 40, 60 deep. And then they side slide, or they'll literally blasphemously take their snowboard off and ride it like a toboggan down to the bottom of the run.
Jeez.
It's the craziest shit you'll ever see. And so the mountain this year announced at the end of the season this massive renovation, but the renovation is to make this place more of what it's become. And that is a giant amusement park for people. So the things they're investing in are not like, hey, let's get out into the backcountry in the summer and challenge ourselves. I mean, there's still those people here. There always will be, because nature is nature. And if it wants to shake us off, it will. But the winter and the summer now is all about getting hammered and just kind of getting, the way I describe it, like a quarter of a mile into the wilderness where you can still see people, but Instagram, if you point the phone the right way, can't see civilization.
So for those of you guys that are listening, Derek happens to be living in a place called Mammoth Mountain, Mammoth Lakes, just north of Bishop and June Lake. I know you guys, if you listen to the podcast, know my parents bought a place there in like 1971, a little condo. My brothers and I bought it a couple years ago off my parents, and we pretty much spent every free weekend either skiing in Mammoth or fishing in Mammoth or mountain biking in Mammoth. So I feel like I grew up there. And then ironically, when Derek started dating his girl who lived in Mammoth, and then they moved there. And so a lot of this, Sierra Nevada kind of stuff is super close to me and just blows me my mind, because I remember as a little kid, I mean, you were talking about remembering ski. The only way I remember skiing is seeing the picture of me at 2 years old in like basically like the jumper, straight snow plowing between my dad's legs. And my dad, like, I can remember the ski, and I have the picture somewhere, but I still laugh. Like, that's the only reason I remember skiing at that age. And we skied, everywhere. I mean, if we didn't get at least 10 to 12 weekends a year, we were like pissed off. So, I mean, it was every other weekend we drove up, and it's roughly 6 hours, 5.5 if we hammered up 395. And we got to the point where like we were old enough to just like get in the car and be like, Mom, go to sleep. And then we were just fucking playing chicken the whole way on 395, slamming up there, trying to get there in like 4 hours and a half minutes or 4 hours, 30 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Back when CHP wasn't living up and down that thing, right?
Oh, fuck, man, we used to hammer. So now it's really kind of turned out. I mean, dude, I remember even as like 16 years old, like basically off-roading to like, God, what's that ghost town?
Bodie?
Yeah, to Bodie, basically parking, and then us walking like as far as we could, or like the hike to like Crystal Falls and some of that stuff. But now that's all changed, huh?
It's changed. It's just population, right? Like it's and everyone said, the pandemic is the cause. Truthfully though, we started to see it before things started to shut down. When you're the best mountain town within 5.5 hours of what they estimate to be activity user base of 16 million people, you don't have to have the same people every weekend, right? You just have to have people doing a thing or coming up to hide out, or, take in nature. Maybe it's not even a bunch of Instagram influencers, right? Like, you get 10,000 people, it saturates a small community. Now, when you get 60,000 or 20,000 on the mountain and you got one grocery store, you can't keep up, right? Sure. So an interesting stat that I heard last year, and I don't know the exact number because it was said by a local doctor, but he just said it matter-of-factly. He goes, it's funny. Everybody was really freaking out about the pandemic. He goes, but we had more deaths on the ski hill this winter than we did from COVID. Right. And when you start to think about that, you're like, okay, so I know we had 4 quote unquote COVID related mortalities, but okay, shit, you're right. Because I remember this winter when we got our 8-foot storm, there was a guy that they found buried on flat ground that suffocated from the snow, which to a skier, we know can happen in a tree well, or if you get an avalanche or something.
Do you think he was drunk and just passed out?
Okay, so you want to hear a disturbing story about this town?
Yeah, lay it on me.
So what they are dealing with, or what they dealt with all winter, and it kind of makes sense, is with the number of catastrophic injuries coming in, broken legs, etc., from the ski hill, the biggest issue the ER had was stabilizing patients, because so many people that come up to this town, and so this isn't just, like your 18-year-old with being crazy. This is adults, wealthy, established humans. So many people that they were dealing with in the hospital had opioid addiction because they're being prescribed pills as a general maintenance to their life because they can't deal with whatever's going on. They had a hard time stabilizing them because they couldn't give them what they needed to in the emergency room to decrease pain. Now you take that and throw in a bunch of like convenient alcohol, wine, beer, a prey type attitude. And then someone is so pilled up, drunk off their ass, the chances of falling over and not getting up in 4 feet of snow, if you're not athletically inclined, probably pretty high.
The only catastrophe I remember coming up on was a dude was like, you remember, I don't know if you probably do, but do you remember Bodie bags? So dudes used to always have just like the old school, like it's all probably changed now, but I just remember dudes had Bodie bags. And I remember seeing the guy, obviously the guy was drinking on the chairlift. He came down and I don't know if he made a bad turn or not, but he hit one of the big pylon poles for the chairlift going pretty fast. I mean, fucking hit it, and the dude was laid out, and I remember seeing the Bodie bag because, of course, ski patrol, and then they'd bring up the cat, and I think the dude was dead, or at least he was unconscious. We thought he was dead, but I just remember seeing the Bodie bag and being like, oh, well, if you're going to ski drunk, I mean, those things are huge, and they're under, like the fact that he hit that, I'm like, I can't even imagine hitting that.
No, and that's exactly it. Like when you throw a person on a set of skis or put them on a steep slope or whatever it is, and they're not skilled enough, and I'm not even talking about being an athlete. Like I know a lot of people that aren't particularly athletic that were really good skiers in the recreational sense. They know how to start, they know how to stop, they know how to control themselves. But what we were seeing is just chaos this year. Like our next door neighbor, her father was up, 60 years old, avid skier. He got clipped by a snowboarder this year that didn't even stop. And when that guy clipped him, he broke 6 of his ribs and gave him a pneumothorax, right? Like that's a dude on a green run, like basically having the exact same injury profile as getting hit by a car at a sidewalk or a crosswalk, right? So they saw so much of that this year. And when you kind of equate it to what it is it's a bunch of like, soft-shelled cars that are driving intoxicated all over a mountain, and it was kind of a hairy year. And it's like, so I was up there, I think I skied 95 days, I think is what I skied this year, 90 of which were at Mammoth, right? Like, so I was on the mountain a lot this year. And,
was that 4 or 5 days a week?
Yeah, I try to get out Monday through Thursday at the minimum. Rarely would I ski a weekend unless I went over to June because I knew it was quiet.
Sure.
And I had epic days at June. We didn't get a lot of snow up here this year.
I haven't skied June since, I mean, the only time we would ski June is if it was like a holiday weekend and we knew it was going to be fucking awful.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, put it in perspective, it was so crazy this winter with people up here that we had a pretty good snow day in June, and they actually had to close the parking lot because no one could park there. It was full, which for people that understand June Mountain is kind of ridiculous. Like you're talking a busy day at June is 4 people in front of you in a chair line.
Sure.
And to be able to, And this year to have days where the parking lot was closed at 7:30 a.m. and people were turned away, it just kind of, I think, you know, with Mammoth in particular, and I know we hammer it a bit for people who have no idea what we're talking about, but it works well because it's a microcosm of what is happening, I think, in the bigger perspective of the United States. Like, for example, I come back from Summer Strong, which we all enjoyed, to another month of mandatory mask mandates in Mammoth Lakes. So regardless of or not if you're vaccinated, everybody here is 100% masked. And I mean, I'm not talking about people that are like, oh, do the good thing to keep Vons open. I'm talking about people that if you aren't rocking a mask, they are freaking out still.
Wow.
Freaking out. I had a boyfriend, girlfriend, like the day after I got back from Summer Strong. So our official mandate here, for example, is no masks outside. That doesn't mean shit to these people, right? They're still hiking fully masked, right? Wow. I was walking through the parking lot with the mask in my hand because I knew I had to go in the pharmacy, and they're stricter than, say, a normal business would be because, you know, they're trying to uphold the propaganda. And so when I was like moving towards the door, I'm like, oh, better get my mask out. And a young couple, athletic looking, you know, I would guess them to be late 20s. And I mean athletic, not like, oh, they probably do some stuff. Like they were fit. They were coming out the door fully masked. And he grabbed her and totally cradled her and pulled her like 4 feet away as she said, yeah, there's one. Right? Because I'm walking through a parking lot, no mask on, getting out of a pickup truck, probably had a shirt. I don't know. Maybe my shirt was identifiable. Maybe I don't know what it was, but it's like, really?
You mean a real man? So she was telling her boyfriend, hey, look, there's a real one. There's a
there's
real man.
A real one.
She's like, there's a real one. And he actually was grabbing her and pulling her away because he was afraid that she was going to like run and attack you because she probably hadn't seen a real man in so long.
Yeah, like let's not kid ourselves. He was using her as a human shield against my corona.
Well, dude, a friend of mine called me the other day and he goes, do you feel nervous when you see people with masks? Like almost like they're still buying into the propaganda, and the fact that they're still fearful of something like this probably just goes to show that we should be nervous around them for other reasons, like snipping on banana peels and getting hit by automatic doors.
Or the fact that maybe their psychosis is so easily manipulated that if the wrong group of individuals, and this is going to be a crazy shit and I'll probably get flamed, but what if there was somebody that was smart enough to know how to radicalize those people? Right? I lived and worked in a country where...
how could you radicalize those people? I mean, different. Well, I mean, let's go theoretically because we know it's happening. The way you radicalize people, like to radicalize somebody, and let's just use Nazi Germany. You have to point at a group and point to them and say they're the reason, they're the problem.
Yep.
It's not us. And if we join together and we aim it towards them, and we get rid of them, then we will have nirvana.
Yep. And so what if you were to do that and use the means of technology to completely disrupt the financial system in the United States, a la GameStop, AMC? So even though I kind of like what's happening for some of these people that are able to become significantly wealthy from being able to manipulate a stock market, but what if you were able to get an anonymous like persona or some sort of Elon Musk? Elon Musk, until he pissed off all the Bitcoin people, was God amongst the crypto world because he could literally make millionaires with a tweet. That's how susceptible people have come in this last little period of time to making like potentially significant decisions, you know, especially when it comes to finances based on someone's Twitter page. Now, some people benefited from that initially, and hopefully they got out before these cryptos reversed on themselves, because he comes back out and decides that, you know, Bitcoin is no longer a green currency, right? That's what kind of started that whole thing.
Which is, can we talk about the irony of this for the fact that he's producing electric cars and the strip mining for lithium and the basically destruction of the planet to pull out the natural resources needed for those batteries is by far like the most egregious thing you can do on this planet?
It's catastrophic.
Yeah. I mean, just Google lithium mining, and you'll see these huge holes in the ground that God, what was the big pit in Return of the Jedi? Remember when they're going to throw
with the worm?
Leia in it?
Yeah, where they were going to throw Leia in it. I remember the little monkey thing was Salacious Crumb. I can't remember the name of that big pit, but that's like, imagine something like that that's miles wide.
Well, imagine something that is so massive that they need dump trucks with 25-foot tall tires to carry the load.
Yeah.
Right? Like, people have no idea, they hack on all this shit, but okay. So we know there's a bunch of gigabyte mines and different lithium mining in Nevada, but no one seems to give a shit about Nevada because, quote unquote, living here in California, that's just Trump country.
Yeah.
Right. We still hear that stuff in our town. What does that even mean? What is Trump country? Right. Nevada is a giant state with natural resources that is being dug to the core because no one goes and visits Nevada. Now, if that was being done in California, oh yeah, we'd have a problem with lithium mining all of a sudden. Right.
And I feel so detached from all this because here in Texas is so different. Like,
dude.
So my daughter started swim club, so she goes at or swim team, whatever, at this place. So it's from 7 to 9. I got to take her, and like walking in, it was really weird because like the only people that were wearing masks were the people were like of Indian, a dot not feather, and like some Asian people, but for the most part, nobody's wearing masks. No kids are wearing masks. Everybody's sitting in close proximity, and like it's almost like like everything opened back up, and it's like, hey, if you want to wear a mask. But it's not required anywhere. I think the only place I've seen it, man, Whole Foods doesn't even require.
So we're out in the country a bit, no mask. I went into Austin for Nate's dinner, and mandatory mask at the same restaurant that gave you guff for walking through with no mask.
Oh yeah.
With the John at my birthday actually walked through a restaurant, popped off the mask just a tad early, and the waiter came up to inform the whole table of the mask law within their walls.
Yeah, that you could only take the mask off once you were seated, not approaching
as you're seating. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like the.
Can I ask the obvious question? Why has masks and people will be like, well, this isn't true. No, I've traveled now. I've been east. I've been west. I've seen. Why is it that masks are absolutely connected to the political parties of this country?
They did a study on this. They found that your fear of COVID directly kind of plays into what your political leanings are. So because Trump was like, it's not a big deal, and I hate Trump. Now all of a sudden I have to think it's a really big deal. And like I forgot the God, what's the name of the news reporter? The chick with the she sits. I forgot what. CNN, whatever. She made a good point where she's like, I have to retrain my brain into seeing people without masks and not being fearful that they're going to attack me. I mean, like it's become.
Are you kidding?
Yeah,
I do have.
She said this on air. Like it's ridiculous.
The Return of the Jedi sand monster, the Sarlacc.
Yeah, the Sarlacc. That's it.
Oh, the old Sarlacc.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So I only know that because we referred to some people that I knew as the Sarlacc.
Oh God.
So
in the Great Pit of Carcoon.
The
on Tatooine, the desert planet.
Yeah, the Tatooine.
That's right. It was Tatooine.
Is okay. So let's analyze this. I don't know about you, but they did the FOIA Act and they got all Fauci's emails.
Yes.
And they dumped all that information. And what's pretty interesting, he goes through and basically he says that masks do not work, which I've been saying for a long time. I mean, I grind metal with an N95 mask, and there is still dirt, grime, metal in my mouth and nose.
Yes.
And a coronavirus is like 80,000 times smaller than the smallest hole that you can visually see with your eye. So we know
it's
for the
an
most
aerosol.
part. Yeah, for the most part, it doesn't. But the fact that people think that this thin piece of cloth or paper, whatever it is, that you've reworn for 7 days in a row is going to somehow magically protect you from this. Isn't this kind of like I was kind of trying to make this analogy or just a little bit of relationship. It's kind of like I don't have to worry about my health because I'm eating magic food or I'm doing something magic.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, a green shake is going to offset the incredible shit show, which is your lifestyle, right? Like I know, especially in the celebrity world, how many people, drugs, drink, party, morality clauses that probably needed to be signed. And they get up and drink that green shake in the morning, and it's their confessional, right? That's their morning confessional to the shit show, which is their life. And as long as they have their morning confessional, they're all is forgiven, right? But that's become the psychology of so many people. And we're seeing it like, when we did this last podcast, we took a little bit of heat because I said that masks were dehumanizing. And now here we are a year later, and we can say conclusively that there are people that the mask has completely broken their connection to social interaction. I watched a guy here in town freak out on, okay, not to go back to Mammoth Lakes, but just a little bit of a caveat. Mammoth Lakes is a sleepy little town. During this pandemic, a guy pulled a gun on another person in the grocery aisle of our Vons because his girlfriend would not keep the mask fully covering the face. Okay. That happened since our last podcast. We had another situation where a local EMT got his ass kicked for trying to reprimand somebody's girlfriend because her mask kept sliding below her nose. So, if you go after somebody's girlfriend aggressively, there's a good chance that the dude that she's with might have a problem with that. And the last time I checked, a millimeter of fabric isn't bulletproof, right? But that's the psychology that we have seen. You could make a strong argument that the expansion of the Antifa psychology is perpetuated by the fact that these people know they will not be identified for their behavior. So you give somebody that thin veil of secrecy, right? Their quote unquote superhero costume, and they start doing some weird shit. And we've seen it up here constantly. People that I know would never be confrontational to other people without masks on have no problem telling somebody to go F themselves in a parking lot because they're invisible to them, right? And it's like, at some point you have to step back and be like, none of this is psychologically positive for our culture. It's how long does it take to recover from this?
It's the physical manifestation of social media where you don't have to confront people anymore. I mean, as you're talking about it, I'm like, the age old troll or the person where I can be anonymous and I can, shit on something. I mean, the amount of times I kind of look at social media as like outlets, not necessarily inputs. I'm going to put something out there. I try not to read the comments. On occasion, people post some fucking stupid shit, and I'll have to reprimand them. But for the most part, I posted that 500 fights monologue from Vin Diesel, which is really the best thing Vin Diesel's ever done. And
for sure.
And these fucking guys were like up in arms, no legitimate tough guy and all this shit. And I'm like. First of all, you follow me and you're commenting on my shit, and when I call you on it, being like, well, I'm like, it's not like we're having a fucking difference of opinion over a drink that we're friends. I don't know who the fuck you are, and you're,
exactly.
I'm posting something because I find it funny, ironic, and I liked it from a serious point in my life 20 years ago. I don't need you to go on IMDb and fucking try to reprimand me on some small error. It's just it's become this interesting anonymity that people have, that they feel that they can, be the Dukes of Hazzard, right in the wrong, straightening the curves at all times. Yep. And I think this mask deal has just extended that personality that now because they are faceless and nameless and they can go out unidentified, they feel like, this is fucking the real life adaptation of my, anonymous social media.
100%. And when you think of proven and contrary to what the modern world likes to believe, there is proven anthropological, sociological studies done on behavior of humans. That stuff actually really exists, even though everyone wants to denounce it now. And people are incredibly predictable to the point where there are those that the mask has become their tribe. Things, wow. And when it becomes their tribe, they now, without even having to speak, can make the connection visually, which is still our master connector to humans, right? Is body language and how we interact with people. It's not our voice. Our voice is what we use to make way in the world for the most part, but it's our eyes that determine whether or not we belong. And as much as people think that that's not the case, all you have to do is look at how quickly people will gather with others of like-mindedness, regardless of background. In sports, for example, or common cause military, or any of these things, has proven that time and time again. And there was a study that came out that showed that you take a group of people, regardless of ethnicity, religious belief, sexuality, whatever our current cornucopia of identifiers are, but you put them together and they all have a common cause, a common belief, a common identifier, regardless of all those characteristics. And that will override all those other things every time. So the study was looking at how people of different backgrounds can basically get along. Well, give them something to get along for. And when you do that to people, it will quickly eradicate all the indifferences that they have. And they may not always get along within their tight tribe, but what ends up happening is that person now, it becomes identifiable to that grouping. And if somebody tries to interfere with that group, they all turn on it like a virus, right? The whole group will turn against that outsider, even though they may have issues with their insiders, right? Like they'll have like a little, Bobby's a dickhead. Yeah, but, Joey's a bully, right? That type of stuff. But don't get Bobby and Joey side by side when another group comes along that they don't want around, because all their differences will be squashed instantly to deal with the other tribe or other group. So
that's a team mentality. Like I might not like my teammate, but when all of a sudden we're playing another team, now all of a sudden we dislike them more than I dislike this person. So now, like the enemy of my friend is my friend kind of a deal, and people 100%. People join together and find like commonality when put in opposition. And it's pretty fascinating that this is the hard part to kind of wrap your head around, is like the fear of the unknown, I think, is by far more, like the fear of the unknown is more gripping for most people than anything else that I've come across. Like I love the fear of the unknown, like what happens tomorrow, what we're going, like all of that kind of makes me excited. But this idea that there's this like invisible something that you don't even know you have unless you get tested, that's going to somehow kill you, even though it's less deadly than the flu with the numbers they're looking at. And it's like, I don't know. I still kind of go back and forth on this, and it's like, maybe I just don't understand the magnitude of it, or the fact that everybody, I don't know anybody that's gotten sick. I mean, I know the people that have got it, but everybody's been like, I kind of just thought I had some allergies. But then you hear these like horrific tales of, things that have died, and that's not close. I mean, that's not even 2 or 3 degrees separation from me. I have to hear about it on the news or read it somewhere. So I don't know, maybe it would be more impactful if it happened closer, but
okay. So I've known a couple friends who lost elderly family members that were COVID positive when they passed. So I can appreciate that. I've had some friends who work in ICUs, one out in Colorado. And when I was starting to freak out a little bit about my own thoughts on the matter, I'd reach out to her and be like, all right, tell me, what are you seeing? Like, not what is the media telling you? What are you seeing? You're the one that's in the COVID ICU. And yes, for sure, people were dying on her watch, but she was very honest. And this is hard for people to hear, so I always, prelude this statement with the fact that, I've pushed 300 pounds in my, big waistband days. The people that were dying in the ICU were obese. 100% of her patients that passed on her watch were all obese. And the fact that nobody wants to talk about the rate of multiple morbidities and death with this, or the fact that people that were grossly overweight or unhealthy are really, really vulnerable, it's kind of a conspiracy theory unto itself. Because if you were to be honest about it, and the fact that a lot of people who were really vulnerable were always vulnerable to something, even if it wasn't this, people don't want to hear that. People don't want to hear the fact that, you know, people that were dying in the ICU, even after they figured out how not to blow up their lungs with
respirators,
the respirators, which no one wants to talk about that right now. You guys remember the nurse on Facebook from New York at the start of the pandemic that got completely deplatformed? Yeah. She came out and made a video on Facebook, and she was hysterical. You could tell that she had like broken, right? She was probably 60 days into New York's like real big rush of COVID cases. And she came out and did this Instagram live, I guess, I don't know, Facebook live. And she knew what was happening. They were rupturing the lungs of the patients. Yeah. And she said, we're killing people. Like, she was distraught. Boom, completely deplatformed. Now here we are 15 months later, and we're like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have been putting everybody on respirators because we didn't know how much oxygen to give them. And we were damaging collateral damage of the lungs of these people. Yeah. You know, like, well, there was a lot of people just died because of negligence.
Well, I mean, Fauci's emails, they knew the hydroxychloroquine worked.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, he says it right in his emails. I was going through a download, like they were kind of like going through all the major points. And he's like, no, this is, but of course, you know, now it's like, was all this stuff politicized, you know, to shit on certain things that Trump was promoting? Like, you know, I mean, if you think like now we have a situation where legitimate information that would have been possible in terms of saving lives was actually stymied and fucking, you know, flipped, that resulted in more deaths because they couldn't give credit and didn't want to add any fuel to try to, like, you know, get rid of the evil orange man. And, you know, anybody that's ever listened to this podcast knows I'm not a Trump fan by any means, but I'm fucking definitely not a Biden fan for the fact that he's not his own man. The decisions being made are not his.
Joe is not running the show. No, he's not. I don't know who he is, but it's not him.
To me, and I people kind of cringe when I say this, it's elderly abuse. So there's a real deal with like abusing the elderly, where people take advantage. You know, the age old you know, Ben Stiller, like, oh, now your back's gonna hurt because you just pulled landscaping duty, like that type of stuff of people taking advantage of elderly people. To me, it's embarrassing, and it's some form of abuse to put him up there and to, like, you know, make a guy who was obviously at one time a career politician. And, you know, just basically removing his dignity. And to me, every time I see it, I cringe. And I'm like, who's okay with this? And more importantly, like, who's okay with any of this stuff? Like, I don't know if you saw Kamala Harris down in Guatemala yesterday, basically telling the people, don't come to the United States.
Yes, I heard about this.
I watched the talk. She got up there and she said, don't come to the United States. Don't do it. Don't come to the southern border. Don't come. Which, I mean, 7 months ago, I mean, geez, they were burning Trump at the stake for saying this stuff. So, I mean, it's just the hypocrisy of it all. And it's almost like, are people I'm kind of speechless in a lot of ways. I mean, I mean, they're like, I mean, on the immigration front, like, they need to somehow revamp this thing where people want to come. There has to be a way that doesn't take 30 years to get you here. Like, they have to have some form of process to get people and actually let people immigrate to this country. And if if the process is so arduous and so just terrible, then people jump across the border. And now, I don't know if you saw the Supreme Court ruled that if you came here illegally and you're trying to apply now, they're not allowing people to, make good on these applications. So, I mean, there's so much inconsistency that, like, it's such a fuck deal.
Well, it's crazy. So obviously I live in a house of immigrants, right? So both Megan and I are are immigrants. We're immigrants to the United States. And
yeah, but you guys are Canadian, which is
right. So
which
that's what they always say.
Yeah. And for you guys know, my mom is from Canada, actually not far from where Derek's from. So like I know that whole thing where my mom always jokes, she's like, Canadian immigrants, like it's a very, very different deal at the northern border than it is at the southern.
It very, very different. And in the process, so I went through the entire process after having been an athlete down here and then starting into like, okay, how do I become a citizen? And it takes time. When I finally decided to, well, I'll tell you two stories. So, and I'll tell you how the system kind of amazed me and how the system is broken at the same time. So for me, when I finally began the process, if you had your papers in order, and you followed the steps, it can be stressful, but I never had a negative experience becoming an American. The negative experiences that I had, if I could even, call them that, was how intensive the process can be for verification, right? Like, the fact that, because I grew up in a small town in Canada, my vaccination cards were kind of like shady, right? Like it was old typewritten, 1979 blue piece of paper with some typewriter written stuff on. So, like all these people shitting their pants right now over the vaccine. I had to get completely revaccinated to even qualify to become an American citizen.
So what year? So did they vaccinate you to whatever the present day what year was this?
2008. I had to get it all again. MMR, like the whole gauntlet. Right.
What's crazy is I don't think I got any. I mean, like I asked my mom when you were telling me, I'm like, do we still have our vaccination cards? And my mom's like, I don't know. When you were maybe in the hospital, maybe 1 year old, you got like a few of them. But she's like, that was all you guys ever got vaccinated. I'm like, dude, did I get vaccinated for these? She's like, I know it was polio for sure.
Yep.
And like, it kind of went through this. And I'm like, and she's like, I know you guys got tetanus because you were constantly stabbing yourself with metal. But
yep, I had to get that as well.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I've had so many TB tests, I can't even describe it.
Is that from the Middle East?
No, that was for being a Canadian coming down to go to school in the U.S.
So TB they were real big on tuberculosis?
Huge, dude. I had to get it every 3 to 4 years. Like, really? Ridiculous. Yeah, man. So they do the little needle under the forearm, creates the bubble, and if you have a reaction, you got TB, right? So it's like, so everybody's shitting their pants right now over vaccines. It doesn't faze me. It's like, dude, if the government was implanting computer chips into new American citizens, I had mine in 2008, so I'm good, right? Like, give me a break. So when I look at
the better part is that people are eating like freaking on the vaccines. And I'm like, well, you basically consume like 40 Oxycontins a week. You drink alcohol regularly. Like the people that, like, it's the only people that are freaking out. It's like, I eat an organic diet. I only drink water. I mean, like those, I could get it. But for most people, it's like you eat like as kids, we chipped out asbestos tile with T-shirts wrapped around our face. So my dad pulled up carpet, and there was asbestos tile, and we had to chip it out. I'm like, I chipped out asbestos. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be okay with a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff. After they built our new high school, it wasn't until we were all moved into it that they informed us our previous one was all exposed asbestos, right? So, it's the same shit. And so when I look at this stuff, I shake my head. But back to the immigration thing, I can also identify, so, can't talk about immigration without talking about the fact that Megan was kicked out of the country as a Canadian during Obama's administration.
Where's she from in Canada? Is she from the East?
She's from the East. And so what people forget is that during, Obama's run, he sent home all the foreign workers that were on visas. And we're not talking illegals. We're talking approved foreign workers, boom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Europe, all sent home, right? So it's not a bipartisan issue. It's an issue, period. During that same administration, we had, and this story blows my mind that I even knew the human that it happened to. We had a family that was immigrated from Mexico to Southern Colorado to work and to create a better life. So when they made the jump over and got jobs in that part of Southern Colorado, a lot of them did come up illegally. And when I was coaching in Southern Colorado, it was not uncommon for immigration services to have buses in town just mass corralling people and taking them back to Mexico that were illegally working on the mushroom and onion and potato farms, I think, that were there. And so we had a really weird situation occur. So we had a family whose son was a really good track athlete. This kid was not born in the United States, but his parents brought him over when he was 1 year old. His two younger siblings, both American citizens, born and raised. The two parents, because they came over on agricultural visas, were able to get them turned into citizenship over that period of time. It took a long time, you know. So this kid, for lack of a better description, born and raised in, raised in America, born in Mexico, whole family was American citizens. We were recruiting him to run track. When he graduated high school, shortly thereafter turned 18, INS deported him back to Mexico. 18 years, never lived anywhere but the US. He spoke Mexican, but that's because his family did. But he had no connection to Mexico. His family never went back. They picked him up because he hadn't been processed in that 18-year period. It just never happened. Either someone forgot to do it or the system was so slow at that time. They bus him back. They drop him off. He had no connection to his home country. Didn't know where to stay, didn't have money, didn't have anyone to stay with. So this is where it gets interesting. We were recruiting a kid who had grown up less than 20 miles from the university that he was going to go to, and we ended up having to give him an international student scholarship to bring him back into the United States so he could run track for the university that was connected to his high school. And then during that 4 years, he had to apply for citizenship, even though he had never lived anywhere but the United States. So you can see how the system is just a chaotic mess of bureaucracy, and everyone thinks it's personal. It's not personal. It's zeros and ones in a computer.
Well, the problem is that they're like, nobody's going to go in and revamp anything. It's kind of like, the big, like you got Gavin Newsom trying to have a lottery for the, for the vaccine, for the COVID vaccine, when, the money that's needed in California is for redoing the infrastructure. Like the waterways, I had a buddy who was a contractor up in LA, and they did a subterranean garage in a parking lot. They dug it, and they had to bring in pumps because it was filling with water. So they were literally pumping out 10,000 gallons an hour out of this subterranean garage that they thought came from a broken water line, but they couldn't find any meters. They ended up working it back, and actually the main was cracked before the water meters. And they were literally dumping that water, 10,000 gallons an hour, into the sewer, into the drain, the storm drains. And the city came out, they called them, they're like, this is a huge problem. This is why we have a drought. And he's like, this is just one of thousands of these. The infrastructure in LA and Southern California and all through California is 100 years old, from the waterways to the gas to everything. From the lighting and this, it is so depleted and broken, and all of the money from the road tax and all that they love to rob, all of the money. I just saw California is going to be 10 or between 9.5% to 10.75% sales tax. So not only paying 10% state income tax, but now sales tax is over 10%. And all of that money needs to go into revamping the infrastructure in California to actually make it a livable place. But then you got Gavin Newsom trying to give away a $50 million lottery on fucking COVID. I'm like, this is absolutely insane.
It's insane. And I had someone last night tell me that the reason why California has not lifted the mask mandate is because Gavin Newsom is doing such a good job at controlling and following science as it develops. And I was like, okay, control this science for me. we know that last year during the forest fires that ravaged the Sierra Nevadas, that a bill got passed that they are going to pull an additional 6 million acre feet of water from the Owens Valley, right? And no one knew this got passed. Where does this water go? It goes down to LA County. So people that want to do some quick math, 1 acre foot is 326,000 gallons. And they're pulling that much more water out of our region, and no one can figure out why it's getting so dry and why it isn't snowing or raining in the Sierra Nevadas anymore. Well, you take away the groundwater and you take away and everyone's, it's global warming. It's not global warming. You have to have moisture coming up for moisture to come down. Dude. And if you turn an area into an arid desert, you're Foxville.
Well, it's so I think it was like 12,000 years ago, there was some shifting within, I think the Earth rotated like a half a degree, and all of a sudden
the progressional shift.
And Egypt basically got all this rain and water and turned into this lush deal. And it's pretty interesting to as they go through and they were like, wow, this was a rainforest at one point, and then it went back and now it's the desert. And it shifts that easy. But I remember as a kid, they were pumping groundwater from, remember Mono Lake? And all of a sudden they had the whole Save Mono Lake. You probably still see the bumper stickers. They were pumping all of that. And basically Mono Lake, which was a prehistoric lake, like I remember as a kid, it was this. And then all of a sudden we were out there and you could see the ground having these huge cracks in it. And they just kept pumping more and more water out of Mono Lake. And, nobody ever stopped that.
And it's not going to stop here either. And, some people that I kind of get to communicate with on occasion are associated with the General Forest Service Fire Protection and Mono and they think that they're going to have a horrific forest fire summer again. And last summer, what people don't realize is we literally had the worst air quality in the world for a month and a half. Yeah. Typically particulate numbers that get somewhere up in the 300 range is considered human toxic, right? And it's like 5 millimoles or 2.5 millimoles, just particle size shit. But basically, if your particle size density gets above around 300, people are going to struggle with that. It's going to cause heart problems. It's going to cause lung and breathing issues. And for weeks, when it would get cooler at night, our town would rock about 2,500 plus. And so when I would look out my window, I physically could not look across the street. That's how dense the particulate was for months. Basically from August through to it snowed. It let up a little bit in October. And so, no one was going to do their hippie protests to oppose some water getting pulled out of the valley, right? Normally they'd be up in arms and, instead of shitting in the streets like they have been up here, they would actually have probably had a parade or two, but instead they did nothing, not realizing that as of this point forward, they only made the situation worse, right?
It feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like the more, the more groundwater you pump out, because obviously everything goes down into the Central Valley because they got, almonds and then, wineries and this. And so the water's being used in different ways. And then you got LA County's, about 33 million people. Some right. Astronomical amount of people. And, that finite resource, they can only get so much, and it all comes from Arizona and all comes from everywhere from Southern California. But the more groundwater they pump, like you said, they lose more moisture, and then that's going to affect the climate.
It does, and you're seeing a massive decrease. Obviously last summer we didn't get any rain. A rain shower here in the Sierras is like a 7-minute sprinkle. I thought it was going to be way more. I thought it was going to be a lot wetter here than it is because of how much snow you can get in the winter. It used
to be.
And that's what I've heard.
I'm in the 80s, man. I remember it raining. It was crazy. If we went up to go fishing in the fall or even in the early March, it would rain the entire time. I remember sitting out on the lake and just water all the time. So, the fact that it doesn't rain there anymore is pretty interesting.
It is. And it's, and I've been here long enough now to be Oh yeah. Yeah. We're 3% humidity is pretty standard. 9%, you kind of get excited, but we don't have, when it snows in the winter, that's what's holding everything over. And this winter we didn't get shit. We for people that it's hard for them to conceptualize, but this place notoriously got 40 feet of snow a winter.
Yeah.
Right. And this winter we got 12. Right? Like we didn't get shit. And this is the second winter in a row. And yeah, you could argue that next winter they get 70 feet. It's an epic monster year and the water table comes back up. Yeah, but they still pulled 12 million, acre feet of water between those two winters. And it's like, you can't recoup that fast enough. Yeah. A friend of mine was up and summited a peak last weekend. And guy's quite connected to the world and, not a Trumper, not any of these things that you can make the argument. He's a, environmentally conscious guy. And he was just out there taking a look around. And he goes, I don't know what the cause is. I can assume it's A, B, and C. He goes, but there is not a snowy peak to be seen in the Sierra Nevadas for the start of June. And it is not uncommon for Mammoth Mountain to be open until July 4th. Yeah. We're closed. It might be the earliest ski hill closing in the last 20 years. I'd have to look, but it's, not to go down a rabbit hole, but it's like, I think people have to start to realize some things like we live in this incredible country. I'm fortunate to be an immigrant here, but fucking A, are we massive over consumers and wasteful individuals? And that's not like a cry for environmentalism. I grew up in a logging town. I believe logging is a renewable resource, so I'm speaking from a perspective of, if you want this shit to last, you got to take some accountability at some point, right? Like, you want the logging industry to continue and you don't want to be paying these record prices to build a home right now. Well, maybe you shouldn't have shut it down in the late 90s without thinking about how to manage it. Just shut it off, right? And it's like the same mentality we're seeing on the other side right now. You want to have moisture forever? Well, maybe you shouldn't just pull endless amounts of water, like you say, that gets funneled into a broken water main that gets dumped into the sewer. Yeah. Like, there's so much waste.
No, and it's, dude, California politics the reason we moved 4 years ago,
it's gross, dude. It's gross.
It was like, I remember having this conversation with my dad. I'm like, Dad, at what point do you vote with your feet? And that was because we were sitting around. I remember having drinks with my brothers, and we were, my dad, who grew up in Southern California, came there in 41 and 42. And, had grown up in Southern California, had seen this, was a lobbyist in Sacramento. We're basically dissecting all of this political stuff. I'm like, Dad, at which point do you vote with your feet and just move? And he's like, I don't know if I can ever leave California. We've been here so long in this. And I was like, I don't think I can continue to give my tax dollars to a system that is so, juxtaposed to everything that we hold true. And and that was one of the big points for us moving is like, at some point you just got to vote with your feet and not be a part of it anymore.
Well, and it's a struggle for me, right? Because I've lived all over the U.S. When I move here or leave here by the end of the summer, I think it'll be the 11th state that I've lived in. So I've had a nice cross section, like you did through the NFL. You get to see some different places, right? And I fully admit, this is the most beautiful place I've ever lived in the United States.
I agree with you.
Like the Sierra Nevadas and in Eastern California, people that have never been don't understand. It is unbelievably beautiful.
Everything from Death Valley to Yosemite.
It's unreal.
Like the Redwood National Forest, the sequoias. Going to like Big Sur and up there, along that northern coast, and like there are so many beautiful. And what's amazing about California is there's so many different, completely different ecosystems. Like those, like those redwoods and the sequoias only grow there in the world. And there's like Napa Valley, and then there's like the whole, Sierra Nevadas, and coming down. I'm sure you've flown into Reno and done that drive that way, and coming over the top.
Many times.
It's it's an amazing place and probably the most beautiful place. But then you're like, how do you balance this with the politics and the fact that it's being run by a bunch of fucking assholes?
Assholes, dude, that are just completely
detached from reality.
Detached. They're getting away with the fact that California has the 5th largest world economy.
Sure.
Because it allows them to kind of slug their way through. Like when your economy is that big, if you're a governor for 8 years, you're not really going to damage much other than you're going to make a lot of money, right? But you're not improving anything. And so like when I look at this place and we talk about, the taxes going up and the sales taxes going up, and the idea that they were looking at passing a COVID reparations bill that was going to basically be a short-term increase in state taxes to offset the cost of COVID, right? And everybody would kind of have to come together and put money into the pot to pay for this. What people don't realize, even if that's only a 2% state tax increase, that will never go back down.
Yeah.
Once they make that jump, it's up.
Temporary.
Temporary.
It's like gas prices. My buddy.
Don't even get me started. 5.5.
Let's get started.
So for diesel, Parsley just hit me up. He paid $4.79 for diesel.
In Cali?
In California, gas is more expensive. But I mean, what do we pay? I pay $2.79, and that's at the height. And so what the reason it's $2 more is California had this road tax. So what they've done, and this has gone back, to the 60s, that there was a fund that they were going to tax on all gas that was going to go into maintaining all the roadways, making sure that the freeways get built and all the infrastructure, and that was agreed upon, and that's why California has this higher cost per gallon. The problem is they started robbing this the gas tax and that like road fund. They started robbing it for the different social programs that they wanted to do.
Yep.
And that's become this kind of it's kind of like you'll all of a sudden hear like them being like, oh, they're going to cut Social Security, they're going to dip into Social Security. What people forget is that's our fucking money. We pay Social Security. So when I hear the government, so what you're telling me is the government's going to steal my money that you guys have been taking from me to create this fund so I can have Social Security at some point in my life. And you guys are in there going to rob. So you're going to steal more money. And it's funny because they talk about it and people don't really realize like, oh yeah, well, they're going to, have to raid Social Security, or we're going to hit Social Security with this. I'm like, so you guys are going to just steal our fucking money. It's it's the same with this road tax. Like, I don't mind paying in if there wasn't a fucking pothole. If if everything looked good and the infrastructure was here and we didn't have 100-year-old water mains breaking, but they don't use it for that. So the fucking allocation's bullshit.
Yeah, like explain to me why we can't water our grass in Mammoth, but people can have green lawns in Beverly Hills, right? Mm-hmm. So like there's such a massive discrepancy in how things are being managed. And that's exactly it. Like, so take politics. Oh, I can't take politics out of it. Try to take the individuals that were running for the last presidency out of it. And I remember having this conversation. And I said, people up here are, probably 95% Democratic voting people, and then out of that, a good portion are just aggressively, leftists. Liberals it's the wrong term, right? Like these people are leftists. They have an agenda belief, not a logical belief. And so we were having this conversation because I'm kind of like, like people know I'm a middle guy. I like to hear things from both sides and then try to make a reasonable decision. So I said to them, because people that know my history know that my life was dramatically affected by Trump becoming president. And the people I worked for were negatively impacted by that. So people are like, oh, so you're anti-Trump. And I'm like, well, pump the brakes. It's like, let's see what the system is going to offer us. And so when it was time to come up for this, most recent election, I'm like, okay, if you could take the media portrayal of Trump away from what's happened, okay, so if you could find a place in your brain to remove that, has your life been here in California been negatively affected by his presidency? And if you were to be really honest, the answer is no, not really. Right? Like gas prices are pretty low, like maybe the lowest they've been in about 8 years. People had, good jobs here. The economy has been quite strong, all those things. I said, okay, so that's where we're at now. And I wasn't trying to sell them, but I'm like, if the alternative becomes president And it's Biden. At the time, we weren't 100% sure who it was going to be because Biden didn't look like he was going to be a good candidate for that. So, we're going back over a year out, probably primary time, when like Gabby's smoking Harris at the primaries, so
fucking
I said, okay, it just stomped her, right? Like she literally was the worst candidate in the primaries is now our vice president. That's a whole nother weird situation. But I said to them, I go, you have to understand if the president changes hands, and I remember saying this, I'm like, you will see $6 gas by the summer of 21. And they were like, no way. Like they couldn't believe it. And Mono Lake, I believe right now is $5.49. And right here in Mammoth, which typically is the cheapest gas until you get to Bishop, is $4.98, right? And so we're talking the first week of June. By the time gas hits $70, $75, or $80 a barrel, which it's going to do, we will see, even if it's premium, $6 plus gas in Mammoth Lakes. Wow. And it's like, so, okay, if you take emotion out of it and you become the selfish one, like just for a minute become selfish and be like, what do I need to buy a house? What do I need to feed my family? What do I need to put the most money in the bank so that when the shit hits the fan, I could afford to buy the generator to prevent the Texas ice storm? Like start looking at very micro, and you have to ask yourself, who is the best representative that is going to prevent me from losing all those things? Because I'll tell you what, in the state of California, the Democratic Party is not doing any of those things for the people here. And you have to have a significant amount of personal income, which they're going to take a big chunk of, to offset the shit show, which has become the state. So obviously a lot of people are moving to different states. So, for us, we thought by moving to northern Montana, we could kind of get closer to home and have freedoms that we don't have here. And, Kalispell, for example, is 62%, regardless of home prices and all that stuff. Kalispell is 62% less expensive day to day than Mammoth Lakes. 62%. Wow. Right. So that's groceries, that's gas, that's, mail surfaces, that's insurance costs. And so when we finally made that decision, and this is where it gets tough. Megan was talking to someone yesterday and finally told them that we're heading up to Montana. Their response, this is the most Californian thing I've ever heard. They're like, Montana, you need to be really careful. And so Megan's like, ooh, right? Well, why is that? Because it's full of drugs and Republicans. And that was her understanding of anything that was not California. Wow. And it's like, well,
what kind of drugs?
What does that mean?
What kind of drugs are you talking about?
Yeah. And if you want to say that, well, how about you pull back on your so-called white privilege and know that the methamphetamine problem in the state of Montana occurs predominantly in the southwest corner in the Native American reserves. Yeah. So what you're really saying is look out for the drug problem that the Native Americans have in southwestern Montana. Oh, and Republicans. But, to say that makes you look like a real piece of shit.
Well, anytime and I ran into this deal, if you're in Southern California, you're from Southern California, and you tell people that you're moving, and this was even 4 years ago, people were like, why? Why would you move? Like right. People couldn't wrap their head around, what do you mean? We live in the greatest state on the planet. You live in Newport Beach in the most amazing, microcosm of everything you want to do. Why would you move? And, like Texas, when we told people, well, we're moving to Texas, they were like, cowboys and it was this idea that we were somehow going to a place with a bunch of hicks and to be hillbillies. Yeah. And, my dad even made a smart ass comment. He's like, what are you going to go out there and be a rancher and be Farmer John, like the, like the bacon and all that? And I was like, look at you. And what's funny is my dad's from Kansas and he grew up in, but it's that same mentality. Like if you're not living in LA and you're not from this part of Southern California or, like you said, and it's kind of a status deal too. If you're from Southern California, you go to Mammoth. That's like a big deal. Like, oh, we're going up to Mammoth. We have a place in Mammoth. That's like the equivalent, I guess. I'm trying to think of here in Texas and Austin, like Port A. Like, oh, like,
I would say
that's
Lake,
a shithole. But yeah,
Lake Travis to have a boat. So you go from the city,
then you go to
through
Lake
our
Travis.
town to go to the lake.
Yeah, it was like, man, like you go to Mammoth. So there was a lot of like prestige with that. But man, it's, and I'm sure a lot of those people that are saying that have never even been to Kalispell, never been to Montana. And the fact that you guys are, you're from just a hop, skip.
I'd say no way.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, it's a perception. You're like, have you ever been there? I mean, I remember standing in Whitefish on the lake and being like you could see the bottom of the lake. It was so clear,
100%.
Like,
And, a perfect example, Whitefish, which, people are making fun of right now because it's like the liberal hub of Montana, right? Because all the Californians that move there and all the Oregon Washingtonians. And Whitefish, for as much as it's having a recreational explosion, the town ordinance is still in place that doesn't allow Airbnbs in Whitefish. No single night rentals. Right. So there's like this. So everyone was trying to figure out, why is everyone buying up all the houses, even the pieces of shit in Whitefish? Well, because they can't do Mammoth Lakes. They can't have these townhomes or homes that have literally never had a residence. It was bought and immediately turned into a rental property. So these towns have no choice. So it seems like there's tens of thousands of people moving to Whitefish right now, but it's really not. There are a lot. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people bought second homes there this past year. But what it is people are like, oh, there's minimal hotels and no overnight rentals.
Yep.
The only way that we can be here is we have to have a house and we have to invest. And it kind of creates a conundrum because the market there has exploded. But to put in perspective, there is not a house or not a car to be rented at the airport in Kalispell for the next month. That's just how many people are there just driving around or looking or doing whatever. And the fact that it's still northern Montana. Like, you need to fucking get your mind right if you want to live there for an entire winter.
It's kind of
right?
like people moving to Texas. I always tell people I've met a ton of people that especially like we're in June. So for the last 6 months, I've met a bunch of people. Oh, where we moved from California. It's so beautiful, and they love it. And I'm like, wait till August.
Till July.
Yeah. Like we're getting into it. Like it rained this morning at 7 a.m. Like pretty good rain. And it's like 90 degrees. So it's 100% humidity and 90 degrees today. Dude. And like it's hot. Like it's hot in here, but I feel like we're pretty conditioned for it. Mm-hmm. The building's also insulated. It, right? Yeah. But it's pretty funny to hear people being like, oh, you're brand new. Wow, enjoy. And then they ask me, they're like, oh, well, when you moved from California, I'm like, you got to remember, I lived in Florida. I lived in Philly. I lived in Kansas City. I lived in godforsaken places when in the middle of the summer. Spots. Yeah, like in the middle of summer, we played football. So it was 100 plus degrees when we were out there. Like it's fine for me, but I can see people that have grown up in California their whole lives and decide that they're going to move to, Austin, Texas or somewhere. And I'm like, welcome. It's going to get fucking hot.
Yeah, and it's like that thing, like we always used to laugh. You can identify the people probably in Texas that are like, whew, how about that heat? You're like, oh, okay, you're less than 6 months. It's going to be like the same people in Montana come January where they're like, whew, man, it's cold. It's like, it's Montana, right? Like you are basically, the shoulders of Canada, right? Like it is cold as balls along that ridge between southern Alberta and northern Montana. Like you got to get your mind right. Like you might have a minus 30 January, not like a minus 30 January 3rd. You will have a minus 30 January. And that's just what happens sometimes. And these people are buying. This is my favorite because I've been watching the market for a couple of years. People are buying up in Montana. And when we started dealing with a realtor, she said, California is actually kind of getting a bad rap in Montana because it's only representing about 20% of who's moving there. She said a large number are people that have moved from the Austin area, Texas, born and raised, that want something more, I guess, in their mind, like it used to be in Texas, politically or culturally.
Well,
so they want.
The irony of that is you got people that are moving out of Texas to go to something to Montana like it used to be. and people from California that are moving to Texas being like, man, this is like California was in the 70s, which is like the irony of that blows my mind.
Blows my mind. And so it was funny. So California is going to get the bad rap, and that's a hangover from the Idaho years, right? So everybody in Montana thinks that it's just California ruining that part of the world, as they say. And then Oregon, Washington, quite a few. But you look at the houses that are getting bought up, you're talking like dirt roads that are like a quarter of a mile long before you get to the highway. You read the descriptions and there's no HOA, right? Which I think people at first are like, sweet, no HOA. No, that means that you have no garbage service and you have to plow that quarter mile long road into your mountain home. That's what that means.
And you have to maintain the gravel.
And you have to maintain the gravel.
So you have to be able to not only know how to drag your road, fill potholes, get out there and do all that maintenance. And I'm like, you got a skid steer? What about a track loader? You got anything? What are you doing? A gravel bucket? Like all of that dirt work stuff. I'm like, and if you don't have that, then you have to pay somebody to come out and fix your road when it gets potted, because if the rain hits, it's going to get pots. And if you drive in the same track, it gets pots. I mean, it's like they're.
Yeah, I'm on the Derek. I have no HOA, and I'm on the entry into my neighborhood. Everyone's got about acre plus plots, and then as soon as you get into the neighborhood, the roads are awful. Like going to Luke's old home. Yeah. Oh man, it's awful. So I'm lucky.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's
absolutely
the one thing which is pretty fascinating, and coming from California into Texas. Like all this stuff, you have to basically know how to run some small equipment and how to set this thing up and how to go out and fill this stuff and maintain, and realize that like, hey, if I got a quarter of a mile to maintain, I either got to get somebody to dump me road base, or I got to be able to go pick it up, and I got a dump trailer. And like now all of a sudden it's like you're like, now I got a 1-ton truck, I got a 14-foot dump trailer, I got to go get road base, and then I got to spread it. And like all these things.
Well, I'm just thinking every time John's got to redo the main road at the ranch that you've been on, boom, freaking downpour, and by goes the road.
Yeah. Well, I gotta there's so my old neighbor, when we first moved into Texas, my old neighbor lived up the road. Was a guy named Tom Dye, who since passed away. He had lived in Texas his whole life, and he had been doing dirt work and like septic for 30 years. So we end up, he comes out, and I thought we had a septic issue. So he ends up coming down. He lived about four people up the road, came down, and he's like, he just started laughing. He goes, "You're from California?" I was like, "Yeah, but I lived other places." He's like, "You're from fucking California." And I was like, "Well, do we have a septic leak?" Because there was all this water. He's like, "It's groundwater, dude. Texas only absorbs 2 inches of water, and then everything turns into groundwater. So what I thought in California was a fucking leak was just Texas groundwater." And so looking at all this, and he was super, super helpful for me in terms of like teaching me how to run equipment and like how to just kind of live here and kind of go through it. And, the lessons were very backhanded and tough, but for the most part, it helped me to be able to do everything around here. And I think for a lot of people that are coming from California and are going up there and buying, oh, this place is out in the wilderness, there's no HOA, I'm a quarter mile and all this, never realizing, and you're going to need about 30 or 40, maybe, call it about 130 and 40. You're going to need a building to house your equipment. You're going to need equipment. You're going to need to be able to do all this. And who's going to run it? Are you going to run it? Are you going to park your Mercedes and jump in your case or your, cat fucking, track loader and go out there and grade the road and get it all set up? No, people ain't going to.
Well, that's exactly it. Because the cost of lawn maintenance is so much less than the cost of a guy bringing out his dump truck and backhoe to fix your road 4, 5, 6 times a year. Or these guys that have a mile, they might have a mile of snow removal, And you're like, do you have any idea how much that's going to cost? And that's not just like, oh, we'll get it done, or we'll do it when it matters. And it's like, oh, you flew into Kalispell for your weekend away to go skiing, and you have a mile of snow that you got to try to get through before you can get to the house that you've neglected for the last 4.5 months.
And the crazy part is, I guarantee they don't have a truck with a blade, and they don't know how to plow.
No way.
I mean, so it's funny, when I lived in Philly and also in Kansas City, my buddy had a shitty old Ford truck that was so rusted out. and had a blade on it. And if I ever had to do any like big type of stuff on a road, because the city would do our front road, but like our side road this way, and I would just go borrow his truck, and I would just, you know, cut the whole deal. And that truck was so rusty and such a piece of shit. But I'm like, now you just got to have a rusty truck with a blade on it all the time that's just waiting in the winter. And you haven't been there for 4 months, and I guarantee you don't have it on a tender, and it's not running. Oh man, it's going
to be a rough transition up there.
And maybe actually, maybe it does help with home prices. Maybe it's a one kick-ass winter all of a sudden tanks that place, because then the people realize like one, they're not going to want to go, because here's the deal, like you said, they fly in for their weekend, and then you spend the whole weekend just basically plowing your road, getting all your services, setting up their, pipes burst. I mean, it's all these things that you got to winterize that I guarantee people aren't ready for.
No, and that northern Montana is a funny place outside of living around the lake, which is all, extremely wealthy, extremely well cared for. And then the little cul-de-sacs up and around the mountain that are the same. Like, that is well cared for, elite organizations running those shows, doing all the plowing, just like Mammoth. But there was such limited amount of that the vast majority of people are living in these little pockets. And, so I said to Megan, I'm like, I don't think they realize that house only looks 2 miles from Whitefish, but it's basically a homesteader's piece of property, right? Because the other issue with Montana, a lot of people don't realize, is outside of Kalispell and Whitefish, you don't need permits to build a house. Yeah. And it's been that way since forever, so these people they had a company, and granted, with that being said, it was kind of like that where I grew up. So a lot of very capable people built their own homes. But with that being said, there's also a lot of people that, they threw up 4 walls on an uneven slab, and now they're trying to sell it for $550, and they can't figure out why, it's not passing the inspection for that price. And it's like, well, because it was never permitted in the first place.
Sure.
Like, these guys have probably had that piece of property for 45 years, and there was nothing in northern Montana. Like, when my family lived in Whitefish almost 100 years ago, it was a little logging sawmill community.
Yeah.
Like, it was immigrants cutting down trees and living in the wilderness. So the fact that, here we are 100 years later, and we're looking at moving back there, and now it's like this uber liberal hip place to have a $4 million second home. Yeah, it's still northern Montana. It's still going to be minus 40 in January. You're still going to have socked in low cloud cover, and you're probably not going to see shit when you're skiing. So, what you think and what it is are not the same thing. 7 months of winter, I'm not even looking forward to that. And that's what I grew up in.
Yeah. Right? But I mean, but you guys in your, for you and Megan, the ability to escape and go, like, you have friends in different places. I mean, it's not like, you're raising 3 kids who are in school, and all of a sudden, like I was, Rob Wolf moved to Kalispell, and they homeschool their daughters, which is super cool, and they're big in their jiu-jitsu deal. But having to like get up at like 5 a.m. to make sure that everybody's packed, ready to go, and the car's warmed up, and then checking road conditions, and then realizing like it was funny. When I lived in Kansas City and Philly, I obviously, drove a truck, but there were some days where, I was like, I got to take my big truck to work because, like the weather or the, so much snow or whatnot. But there's a whole like different, I guess you could say, like, set of things that you have to worry about, especially like I get the kid. Oh, is that me? Okay. I got to get the kids to school. I got to do this. I mean, there's just a million different things. And 7 months. I mean, it's a beautiful place for 5 months. And then you get into it, and the winter's great for about the first 2 months. And then all of a sudden you're like, shit, this ain't going away anytime soon.
It's not going away. And, it was, I think it was 3 weeks ago, the top of Blacktail Resort. So, for people too, geographically, have to understand, my house right now is at 8,000 feet, right? Where I'm sitting in this chair, I'm probably at 8,001. That is 2,000 feet higher than the peak of Whitefish Mountain that they ski on, right? So here in the Sierra Nevadas, we're so high. Like, the peak here is, just over 11,000. The base of the mountain's 9. So when you look at, say, Kalispell or Whitefish in particular, where that ski resort is, I think the base is 4 and the peak is 62 or something. Like that whole area is so much lower geographically, and the cloud and the moisture sits in that slightly, well, you don't get the wind, you don't get the Sierra wave blowing out the constant cloud.
It's not like Wyoming.
Definitely not like Wyoming.
And I know you went to school in Wyoming, and I know you don't want to go back to Wyoming.
Wyoming is a cold, bitter, blue place to live. It is the prettiest, non-cloudy, coldest place I've ever lived. That place was a trip. Like, that was a -40 for the month of January place. And, it was weird because you're at 72.20, you're high up, never gets cloudy, never rains. It's a high desert, and it's freezing cold. It's a brick of ice. And there is a mass migration to Wyoming. Not just Jackson. Like, everyone has already bought up Jackson is basically the equivalent to an offshore tax haven, right? Like, everyone's like, man, why is Jackson Hole so expensive? And it's like, well, because it's the next best thing to putting your money in the Cayman Islands, right? Like, that's why Jackson is. It's a giant tax shelter, and no one really lives there. It's just, a bunch of homes and some skiing. But people are now thinking they need to do that with the whole state. And it's like, you have any idea what that desolate monster is like, come like late November? It kind of rolls in, and someone just turns the temperature off. Like that entire northern part into the Dakotas, Wyoming, southern Montana, you get a little reprieve in northern Montana, but southeastern Montana, they just turn the power off and go on vacation. They turn it back on in April, right? Like that's basically what happens.
Man, we skied in Jackson Hole, and it was not only was it cold and it was rough. Like somebody asked me once, like, what was it like skiing there? I'm like, you go to concerts? And they're like, yeah. It was like, it reminded me of going and seeing Slayer and Megadeth. It was like that type of, like, you show up and you're in for a fight. It's not like, hey, I'm going to see Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue. Would probably be a pretty good time. Or like some like Metallica or whatnot. Like, you show up to a Slayer show, you're leaving with, like, there's going to be blood. And like, I felt like when
there's going to be blood, man.
When we skied in Wyoming, it was like, I mean, I remember we skied the Big Three up in Banff and that whole deal. And like, that was, I thought that was pretty amazing and very inhospitable. But like, Jackson Hole was like, fuck, dude, like, this is some serious shit. Like, this is pushing the boundaries of, of your skills. And if you fuck up, you're going to get hurt. And when you go down, you're going to hit a rock. And it was, the only way I equated it was a Slayer show.
That's actually a really good analogy, because like Mammoth has areas where you can get yourself into trouble, but the way it's become, because it's so curated now, for the mass user, it is the biggest, steepest, easiest mountain I've ever skied.
What I mean, we used to ski. God, what was it? Was it 9, 23, and all those the ones on the backside?
Yep. So 23 is going to be like dropouts, wipeouts, paranoids. With 22, it's going to take you up to Lincoln, which you have to have your shit together for, right? And 9 will get you into some decent terrain. But it's like, as soon as they started grooming off the top of the mountain, everyone had an out. And, your generation of Mammoth is the same generation as Megan's godmother. You used to have to literally drop into cornice. That's why it was called cornice.
It was 9 to 10 foot drop. And I remember
easily, and it was like a rite of passage.
Yeah, and like we would stand up there, and it was pretty interesting. You come up, and you would see people taking their poles and trying to break, shatter the front, and there'd be all these pole marks, and people were just trying to. The
mountain is famous for that.
Yeah, and so we would hit the deal, and you would just kind of like try to break away enough to give yourself a slot so you could actually see where you were going. Because if you went to go look over, and like nobody was wearing helmets. Like, I think it's hilarious. My brother will send me pictures wearing helmets. But like jumping into that thing, and like you got to hit it and keep going because people are coming behind you. Like, and that was a rite of passage. I mean, I remember as a kid, like that was our deal. Like, coming off the cornice, that was something that was big for us.
100%. It's a lot like, jumping into Jackson, which they still do, and it's like Couber's and, but that's how Mammoth used to be. Like, I have never gotten to see that rugged, uninhibited Mammoth energy that Megan and her godmother saw, where you had to ski. You were you had to be considered of an expert level to ski expert terrain.
Yep.
And, you know, in the time that I've been here, it's a giant playground of like easy peasy photo opportunities, unless you know where to go. And if you know where to go, it gets very dangerous very quickly.
Yeah.
But compared to say Jackson or Tarhee or some of these other like mountains, and Colorado's in the pretty much the same category for the most part as Mammoth is. But like some of these other mountains where they haven't softened the outer edge of what made them famous, right? So if you're going to go ski these mountains, it's assumed that you read the sign, and if it has 2 black diamonds on it or whatever, that is really what it means. It isn't a warning as much as it is a guide of ability level.
Or you see the sign with "Don't ski out of bounds" with like the dude like upside down with the skis and like going off
stuck in a tree well.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
And like, you know, and I remember I think I told you when we went to Jackson, they were like, "Don't ski out of bounds," because that was our deal, man. At Mammoth, we always skied out of bounds. And the first thing they told us is don't ski out of bounds because there's craters and crevices that are like 10,000 feet deep. And you'll go in and we'll never find you. Skiers disappear all the time and want to fuck around out of bounds. And we were like, okay, I guess we're not skiing out of bounds.
And that's exactly it. And you come to respect it. It's like when we were skiing in Alta this year, even though it was really bad snow when we were over there, you could just see that the expected level was so much different for terrain. You know, if you were going to take the skis off and hike up and drop into one of the chutes off the west side, it's like, well, it's assumed by everybody involved that the only reason you're there is because the terrain matches your skill level.
Yeah.
Right. And
you're not doing it for the gram.
You're not doing it for the gram. You know, it's too dangerous. It's literally too dangerous to be able to stop and mess about. And we just don't have that right now. Like, even up on top of Lincoln, which can be, you know, if you ski the chutes of Lincoln off 22 here, it can be really, really treacherous. And it's just, it's not. They've found a way to make it basically passable for a really low entry level.
Is that because
weird.
The quality of the skier isn't as high, or people are just there?
Oh yeah, it's
party?
Not as high at all. Yeah. So there's 2 things that we see. One, all the snacks at the cash register were replaced with airplane sized bottles of booze this year, right? Which that's super weird. Like, talk about perpetuating alcoholism in young children. So that was strange to see. And then the other is the general entry level of the people up here is so low that, okay, so our generation, it'd be like any sport, like equate it to the weight room. We would be embarrassed to do things so poorly in the weight room that people would laugh at us in our generation, right? Like, you just wouldn't do that. You wouldn't go into the weight room and do some sort of weird, funky movement and think it's acceptable, because those that have been around would be like, what are you doing? So in the skiing world, what we're seeing is, because the majority of people here, their entry level is so low, nobody really calls them out on it. So if someone like takes their snowboard off and sits on it like a sled and slides down a run, you know, 1 or 2 people in the chair will be like, oh, look at that guy. What a, you know, douchebag, right? But in terms of the general population, their actual response might be, oh, yeah, that's so much easier than what I was going to try to do, right? And so you get this like mass amount of low quality humans doing low quality shit and ruining a high quality thing.
Well, fuck, I'm totally blanking on the name. Like, we watched all those ski movies with the narrator, like
Jeff Stump or like Warren Miller.
That's what it was. Yeah, like all the Warren Miller movies. Yeah, that was like our number one deal. We would watch these Warren Miller, and he was this old ski bum who got cameras and these dope skiers, and he would like narrate these guys just doing the most insane shit. So we would get these movies, VHS, and watch these Warren Miller, you know, and then the minute we got out there, there was like this idea of like, hey, we're going to try to do something that's like worthy of a Warren Miller film. And like that was the level of acceptance. Like, you didn't dress like an asshole, you know, like, I mean, do you remember the one dude who had the mohawk that was like 7 feet tall?
Mammoth local. That's Glenn Plake.
Yep. Yeah,
right?
dude. We used to see that guy, and that guy was in Warren Miller stuff, and that was a huge deal.
Here's what's funny about that. I was just going to use him as my reference because Glenn Plake is still on Mammoth Mountain half the season, right? So dude, he's up here.
He's got to be 60 or 70. Maybe
pretty
60?
Close, and like super athlete now, right? Like he was a wild man when he was younger, but now he rides he does like the 503 in the summer, which is like a 500-mile bike ride. He's a hardcore gearhead, right? So like rock crawlers, high performance cars, has a host a TV show, and like in his early 50s, flat out won Masters Nationals for water skiing, slalom skiing. Like so the guy's like this still crushes it, right? So he was like, again, like yourself, one of my idols. So I got to meet him this year through Megan and got my photo taken with him. It was rad, right? But what people don't realize is this is a guy who was like Oakley and K2 and like super sponsored in the 90s.
He had he would wear hot pink like he would wear a hot pink suit. He had the deal on the razor blades. And dude, okay, so I'm 44. So when I was probably like 30 years ago, we would see that guy on the mountain, and that I just remember like seeing that guy and being like, holy shit, that's like the coolest cat. Like we would see him in like the Warren Miller films, and he was out there fucking like just not only killing it, but would do aerials and jumps and like spin shit off, and you know, like
he created like the big mountain freestyle movement, right? Like him and Scott Schmidt, and then McConkey came after. And you know what's really crazy is to put it in perspective, and it happened to me this year. I was going up 23, and I recognized him because I recognized how he skis. But here's all these guys ass sliding down the mountain, taking selfies and being generally shitty, right? Like that's what's happening all around me. And then I look up and I see this dude, not flamboyant, like he doesn't have his hair up. You know, he doesn't wear a helmet, right? Because he's old school. So that's how you can always kind of spot him. Yeah. So he's got like a toque on, goggles, and I see him kind of drop off the top of 23. And I immediately could tell it was him because I've seen him ski before. Yeah. And he just rips this like effortless line through this like super gnarly shit. And he never stops skiing. He never breaks. He never takes a breath. He never looks back up at what he did. I just see him like drop in and just do this perfect line all the way down, kind of up and over this like little cornice cliff, and just drops off it. And it was so smooth and perfect. And then he was gone. And in my mind, I'm like, that is literally one of the fucking legends of our sport. And no one even knows that that guy just shredded this line like he's done a million times.
And he didn't stop and take a picture. He just fucking was epic.
I found
and
he was literally just epic.
Because here's the best part. It's just what he does. It's nothing special to write home. He's not going home and telling his wife like, oh man, I found this killer shoot and I ran this perfect line. It's just what he does. And he goes out there and just, I mean, dude, the fact that he still skis, and like I just remember being like a kid and seeing that dude, and like I just remember hot pink. He had the mohawk up like maybe like 3 feet, and he would wear the razor blades, and dude just killing it down the mountain, and us as kids being like, oh, that's the coolest dude ever.
Found an article that calls him the Frank Sinatra of skiing.
The Frank Sinatra scheme.
Go up,
it makes
go up.
sense, man.
Yeah, there he is. God damn it.
And you know what's crazy with Megan's ski team this year that she coached all year? At the end of the year, it accumulated to like a competition. And so here's like Plake, who's like the man, especially in this region. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the head coach for the team just went, hey, would you be interested in being our guest judge for these like little kids skiing? And he's like, sure. And he literally just, no money involved, no nothing. Here's the guy that we know to be, you know, the legend of our sport, sitting there as a guest judge quietly on the rock, and he is evaluating these ski runs. And it's because to this day in his late 50s, he's still like, this is the greatest sport I've ever done. And he could be the dickhead. He could be the guy that still wants to beat the social media drum to stay relevant. But to him, relevance is actually working with, influencing, and trying to get another generation not to forget how rad the sport actually is.
Yeah, he was like the anti-Lance Burkhart. Remember Big from time. North Shore? Yeah, he was like the anti, like Laird Hamilton played in this movie called North Shore for people of Derek and I's age, like especially growing up in Southern California, like that was our like. And like I watch it now, I made my kids watch it. They're like, this sucks. I'm like, shut up. When we were kids, this was fucking great. And so Laird Hamilton plays Lance Burkhardt, who's like this arrogant surfer. And so like there was always this thing of like, oh, you don't want to be the Lance Burkhardt of that. But that, yeah, dude, that's so killer that guy still skis and you still see him.
Yep.
Like I kind of just figured he fucking, I hadn't even thought about it. Probably just grew his hair out and shaved it normal and was an accountant now and had this bitching thing in the 80s and the 90s. The fact that he's still out there crushing, it's awesome.
Still ripping, man. Like you'll go up to Main Lodge and there'll be this I can't remember what they're called, like a Class C plus whatever motorhome looking thing, and it has like the giant like mohawk on the side, and that's him. He just parks it and does his like publicity stuff for the mountain and skis all day, and just he's, you know, for the best way I'd describe it, outside of probably getting paid some cash to do some backcountry stuff or to go over to France, which he probably didn't do this year at all, obviously. You know, he's like an ambassador, you know, to the sport of skiing, you know, because he was, you know, that's like, it was cool back then when there was a little mystique to it, right? Like before social media, like you had to kind of be a ripper that, you know, had to be good enough to be in like that top 5 group that a Warren Miller, which is crazy to think that Megan has a personally signed Warren Miller Mammoth Lakes book on her counter, right? Signed to her by the legend. But it's kind of crazy. Like you were spotted, then you had to prove yourself. And then you were selected into this group that made ski movies that people would pay to go to theaters in like Aspen or Banff or wherever to watch. And so I'm kind of torn, right? Because although now I'm starting to clearly see that social media's ability to give access to all these people with potential has definitely raised the bar. Like people are doing shit now that I never thought would see people do in our sports, in track and field, for example, in the men's shot put. Like there's so many good people in skiing. There's so many good people that, you know, it's sort of like the 4-minute mile. When one person does it, then all of a sudden it's achievable. Social media's kind of ripped that fabric, right? So you're seeing people all over the world doing such crazy shit that you're like, oh, okay, I guess we have to do that too, you know? And so, although I think that's super important, I do miss the fact that, you know, these guys were like, I guess idol would be too strong of a word, but, you know, people definitely idolized them. They put their posters up on the wall, things like that. But there came like a personality or an energy to that generation that we don't see very much now. And it wasn't that they thought they were better or anything like that. It was just like, I'd almost call it camaraderie, because it was such a tight group of people trying to do a thing that social media sometimes I think washes that away. Like you could be all completely by yourself with maybe 1 or 2 other people. And because of social media, you can get the image out there, get the video out there for people to appreciate. But you didn't meet a group of like super rad dudes on that Saturday and just do crazy shit.
Yeah,
like
but wasn't it more localized? Like growing up in Southern California, skiing at Mammoth, like we knew who Glenn was, and like you know, like because it was like Surfer Magazine and Ski Magazine and all that stuff we'd see at the grocery store, and that dude was always had some like, you know, is either an Oakley ad or he was on the cover or whatnot. So like kind of growing up, but I can't imagine there were kids in like the Midwest who were looking at ski magazines and like seeing this dude or got a chance. So I wonder if it was more localized, where now it's like, you know, you follow adventure as a hashtag on Instagram and you like get this like amazing fucking perception of like what's going on. I mean, I looked at Instagram this morning and like there was an adventure tag and it was actually in the Swiss Alps of somebody like hiking something that I was like, holy shit. Like, dude, I mean, and they just had a pack, you know, high socks, boots, shorts, and a t-shirt. And like all of a sudden they were like on the side of this mountain. And I'm like, holy, where is that? And more importantly, why aren't I there right now?
Well, that's a good question. And so it makes me wonder, like, you know, so we're the same age, you know, so maybe we have a different perception of what you just said. Like, why am I not there right now? Because I remember as a kid flipping through Powder Magazine or Ski Magazine. And obviously, as a kid that was obsessed with water skiing as well, to meet, you know, who's now since passed, but to meet my idols like Andy Mappel or the next middle generation, a guy named Marcus Brown, who was the videographer for Megan's commercial this year, which blows my mind because he was a world champion water skier who's also tied into Glenn Plake. But, it's like when we used to see that in the magazine once a month or whatever it was, or watch a video, like you wanted to turn 18, pack your shit and go to Mammoth Lakes from small town Canada because you wanted to go to that place where this epic thing was happening. And so you still have, because I do too, you have that reaction on social media when you see the hiker, in the Alps, or, someone in Majev standing in this pastoral farms in the summer when the ski hills closed. And you see that and you're like, why am I not there? But what I fear is there's a ton of people in this next generation, this most current generation, they don't have that thought because they don't have to, because they are living psychologically through the imagery that they're seeing. And you're like, well, why don't you want to go and check that out? And they're like, oh, maybe. And it's like, why maybe? Yeah. Like, that's where you should go right now.
Dude, I tell Matt Vincent this, like whenever like he goes on his trips or whatever, like Iceland, and he'll post these pictures, like I'm the first one to be like, dude, I love, like I got 3 kids and a wife. Yep. I mean, it's very hard for me to pack up and go to Iceland, even though I tell my wife we're going to go all the time. But like when I see Matt post that stuff, I always text him. I'm like, dude, I love seeing this. Not because it's like a FOMO deal, but like it's just it allows me to see like and to mentally think like, man, I want to take my kids there. Like I want to see that. And I love to know that like I have friends out there that are doing really epic fun stuff, like
epic shit, man.
Yeah, like not just like, oh, so what'd you do? Oh, well, I sat at home. It's like, dude, like that stuff is I don't know. It's inspiring, man. Like I like the social media thing. I think for some people, maybe it's a generational deal where, like you're saying, we look at it, we're like, man, like this is someplace I want to go. I want to save that because like if I get the opportunity, I want to go to this place. Not necessarily like I want to go to that place to take this picture because I don't give a shit if anybody ever knows if there's a picture. But I want to stand on the side of that mountain, kind of like when we went to Oktoberfest. My biggest regret on Oktoberfest is that we weren't in Lederhosen.
Gotta go back,
dude. I want to go back. I told my wife and the kids, I'm like, dude, I'm getting you guys the outfits. We're gonna go. We're gonna totally do the whole fucking Griswold, show up in Lederhosen and go crush Munich and Oktoberfest.
Well, but like you gotta schedule 2 days. 1 day with the family, and then you and I will go round 2 and find our guys. The party guys that are standing on the table, breaking glasses.
So the Tex and I taught a seminar in Nuremberg. And it was during Oktoberfest. So then we were like, hey, we jump in like on the train and we drive down, or we take the train down to Munich. And so we walk out and like, we're in like the Munich Square, which is so cool because like if you know history, like, the rise of the Nazi party was in the beer halls of the Munich. And like we went into these places and you can see where they like chiseled. They didn't remove the murals. They just chiseled off the Nazi stuff. And so just super amazing. And then you go out to the parade ground where, Hitler and like, those huge parade grounds of when they would like have the big shows for I mean, that's where that thing is. Yeah. So having like seen that bit of history and going, it was pretty impactful. And so we walk into this like, huge tent that's probably like 10 football fields. And there's like 7 polka bands. And like we walk in, we don't have seats, like as people buy like tickets for tables. And like Tex is like, hey, where are we going to go? I'm like, just hang out and watch, dude. We got to find our people. And then like a few minutes later, all of a sudden I see this like beer stein shatter and these dudes start fighting and like battling. I'm like, those are our guys. And we went over and they were Americans and Canadians playing hockey in a league that was in Europe. And so like I roll over and I'm like, these are our people. And then we ended up just like rocking it with these dudes, so much so that they all got booted out and we got our own table.
Well, all because the power John tipped the waitress. Yeah. And the guys were not tipping.
Well, so in Europe, tipping is not like American etiquette. And so when the lady brought us over these huge beers, I think it was like €40. I think I gave her like €60. And I used the Rodney Dangerfield. Hey, keep them coming. The minute you see this thing get low, bring me another one. And when I pass out, bring me 2 more, And we got that tip. And like instantly, the minute that our beer steins got low, she brought us new ones and we rocked it.
Yeah, and there's a transition. Daytime is like open table, open seating, and then you have to have tickets and reservations for 5 p.m. on. And as soon as we hit that transition, she just called us over and sat us down in a reserve table and kept the party rolling for us, the other guys.
And yeah, they booted them all out. And then we ended up at a table with like a bunch of Russians. Remember, it was like a bunch of like
Jesus.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, it was
weird
adventure.
Yeah, it was like you know, I'm not a God. What's the name of that country dude who's real short? Kenny Chesney. He's sorry. He's got a song where he's like,
well, Brad Paisley also very short.
Well, so he has a song where he's like, I went out last night. He's like, I was Brad Pitt's brother. I was a senator's son. And he's basically just telling like all the lies that they told everybody. That's what I felt like happened to us, because we were like talking to these people that were Russians. They were these Germans. They were like, it was just this, you know, plethora of fucking just drunk idiots. And we had a hell of a time.
Including us. Yeah.
Including us. Yeah, it was good.
I can't wait to travel again.
Dude.
Oh, I know, right?
It's just the ability to go somewhere and like hear a different language and try something where like, I don't know if this food's going to be any good, but let's give it a shot. Like
100%.
You know, I mean, that's,
Well, it was always cool to find people that love to lift heavy weights. I know we were teaching the seminar and we were able to connect, but there were so many people all over the world that just wanted to be strong. And that was always a great feeling, just showing up, knowing people are come to us to learn something about lifting.
So we had some friends over on Saturday night to have their kids over and, you know, go swimming and shit. And one of the guys is turning 50, and he's like, you know, I'd like to do something epic for my 50th. And my joke is like, why do you got to wait till you're 50 to do something epic? Like, what do you want to do? And he's like, I'd like to like go to like Africa to hunt. I'm like, we got a dude in Namibia. I heard the hunting in Namibia is pretty dope. And he was like kind of going through these other things. He's like, where could you go? And I'm like, by far the coolest thing I've ever seen, and I've been forever jealous, is Jared Allen, who I played with in Boomer Grigsby. Yep. They went to New Zealand and hunted red stags. And like these things are just these massive. In the picture they sent me, I just like, my heart stopped, and I was like, thanks for the fucking invite, you selfish fucks. But like I showed him the pictures, and I was like, man, this is if I wanted to pick any place in the world. And like he's like, it's great. And then the next question is, will New Zealand let us in with COVID? And I'm like, oh fuck, I don't even know. Like the fact that that's a real, like you know, like here's a, you know, sitting around having drinks, like dreaming of going on some epic.
I just pulled one up on Google. Holy shit.
Dude, the only negative, and this is what Jared and them said, is they went for like whatever 2 weeks. They got like I want to say they were like 7 or 8 days in, and they shot a big one. The problem is you can't bring the meat back, so they stayed an extra week to try to consume as much of the elk or the stag as possible.
Did they at least like?
Well, they got the head, but you're not allowed to bring the meat back. So like the funny thing is they were like, if you ever hunt, try to kill something the first day and stay for like 2 weeks and just eat nothing but the food.
This gnarliest antler set I've ever seen on any animal. This is incredible.
Dude, they are by far the most amazing things I've ever seen. But I don't know if we can even get into that country. I know Perry, who does our branding in the UK, they pretty much like listed countries by colors of places that in the UK that you can visit, and America's like all red. It's like a no-go.
Yeah, New Zealand's pretty much got us off the radar, and I don't know when that's going to come back. Canada's the same right now, right? Like Canada's got these extreme.
Didn't they? My mom was telling me that they were nervous to have people go to polling places, so they were going to suspend elections.
Yeah, it's funny how that all seems to start to show up, right? When pretty much guaranteed that the current leadership of a country is not going to make it through the next round of elections.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's funny how that shit starts to overlap, you know?
I didn't know if that was true or not, because I hadn't necessarily looked it up, but I figured you would know. But yeah, that seems.
Yeah, I know that there is an election coming up. I just don't know how far out it is. But it will be a tough one. Well, you know what? If the current prime minister gets reelected yet again after tanking an economy and basically and that's prior to the pandemic, tanking an economy and then basically being so disorganized that they didn't get the vaccine. A first world country doesn't get the vaccine because he put too low of a bid, right? And now it sounds like, you know, a couple comments have been made publicly that the reason why they showed hesitancy in getting the vaccine in Canada prior to the election was because they feared that Trump would use it as a negotiating point for, you know, international commerce. And it's like, okay, so You didn't pay full price to a president that you didn't agree with because you were afraid that somehow he could use it as negotiating leverage. Meanwhile, my dad, who's in his 70s, has still not received his second vaccination, although he is 3 years cancer positive. Like, do you have any idea how poor you have to run a first world country to pull that off? You know, meanwhile, the U.S. has vaccinated 270 million people,
and going to have a lottery in California for it. I mean, it's like
Canada has done everything wrong when it comes to, like, there's a lot of countries you can argue maybe didn't do a good enough job. Like England seemed pretty extreme, but they were a confined island. So the idea of a pandemic that could have been horrific breaking out on an island seems like, oh, yeah, maybe you should probably be pretty aggressive with how you handle it until you know what's going on. But Canada, you know, when you have like one of the largest countries and the most uninhabited per square mile, the fact that they are still using roadblocks and police enforcement to prevent travel 15 months in is asinine.
I mean, we can, I don't know. I mean, we'll look at both sides of this. But I have a hard time believing that's incompetence. Like, I mean, and if it is,
it's too purposeful, right?
Yeah, it's too purposeful. I mean, it's I don't know. Like, it's there's this idea. I think that there's some grand conspiracy, and when you really look at it, it's just fucking level of incompetence that's so high that people can't even. And it's actually more comforting to think of something nefarious with some evil Bond-like villain pulling the strings than the truth, which is they're just fucking incompetent. And Trudeau. Like the dude that guy jumped the shark so many times. The fact that he's still in power blows my fucking mind.
Well, take the what is it now? The Premier of Ontario. It doesn't matter. His brother was the mayor that did all the crack and became famous on. Yeah, right. So that guy's brother is now running the show in Ontario. And I read an interesting, you know, a lot of stuff, you always have to be careful because can you confirm it or not? But during the pandemic, someone said that his personal wealth increased 10 times. And it's like, well, how do you increase your personal wealth during a pandemic as a politician unless you are doing things that are incentivized, right? So, you know, people are like, wow, he wouldn't do that. And it's like, well, yeah, his brother also did a shitload of crack cocaine, right?
Wasn't it down in like Detroit or something? Like,
like in brothels and shit, and just getting like, smashed, right? And so when you look at all this stuff and you look at like just Canada and how it's been done, I know people love a good conspiracy theory, but more times than not, it's oblivious consent followed by people that are really good at taking advantage. Yeah. Right. So you get a bunch of people who are like, well, I guess this is what we do now with the masks, blah, blah, blah. And someone that is in the background is like, okay, I don't know, like Jeff Bezos is like, how do I make people stay at home so that I can sell shit to their house at a level that's never been done in history? And even though everybody's brainwashed to think they can't leave their house, I still will have an entire warehouse factory full of employees going to work every day. How do I pull this off? Oh, I know. I'm going to spend $250 million cash on the fucking Washington Post. And I'm going to have one of the largest newspapers in the country tell everybody that they need to stay in home or they'll die. Oh, by the way, buy a lot of shit from Amazon. And let's start releasing direct to Prime movies that would have gone to a movie theater.
The other one, and I'm surprised nobody's talking about, especially with a lot of the, COVID justice warriors. What about the environmental impact of the masks?
Oh, the garbage in the ocean?
Dude, the amount of times I'm walking through, like I went to CVS, I picked up 2 masks that were just randomly in the parking lot and threw them away. I'm like, the amount of masks that I see and like this, basically like the gross pollution aspect, I'm like, where are all the COVID justice warriors on this? Like, why aren't we recycling these fucking paper masks that I see everywhere?
Everywhere.
And people at the beach, like I saw some dipshit in the water with one. I'm like, that thing's not fucking leaving that ocean. Like, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong? Where,
he was just giving it a ride to its final destination.
I could see if everybody was sitting at home and busted out their sewing machines and made cloth masks and they were washing them like my wife did, who refused to buy the paper ones.
Same. I have a washable, reusable.
Yeah, and because she's like
I
waste.
can't buy it.
And then the fucking just the paper ones, and I'm like, God damn it! Like I keep a cloth one if I fucking have to wear it if I go in somewhere. But now, I mean,
same.
Like the last place was Whole Foods was like the last bastion of that, and I walked in the other day and I was like, I'm not fucking wearing it.
Oh yeah. I stopped a couple of weeks ago with them. Well, there's usually a guard posted out front of Whole Foods.
Yep.
And then the moment I went there at 8 a.m., so right when it opened for some breakfast, there was no guard. Ever since then, I guess.
Yeah, they're like,
they're not paying somebody to sit there and read.
Well, I mean, what's he going to do? Bar you until you can't go into this place of business? Tell him to go fuck himself?
Yeah, right. Well, and
not at that corporation.
I'll tell you what, it's a strange thing that we're seeing, right? California right off the bat, and this one just got like 100. So we got this $50 million, $115 million total lotto in California, but nobody wants to ask the question about the fact that Newsom paid a Chinese company $2 billion to buy 5 billion masks at the start of the shit show. Now, people are like, well, why would he do that and not buy an American company? Well, probably because he was able to get 5 billion instead of 4 billion, right?
Was he giving them away or was he selling them?
Selling them. Yeah, selling them for sure. People also don't talk about the fact that Newsom is owners in a PPE company, right? And the fact that company that he bought the 5 billion masks from, it's not even a mask company. It was an electrical transit company based out of China that he already had a contract for to build electrical buses, and the contract got shelved, so he gave him $2 billion to start making masks. Like, how is that not like
or that
a legitimate conversation?
He declared his his wine
vineyard?
His winery, his vineyard. What is it, Plumpjack, as a important business, or what was it?
Essential business.
Essential business. And he also gave, I think it was like essential business status for his kids' private schools. So I mean, like, dude, it's straight up, man. Like
shyster.
Well, it's what we're seeing is classic French Revolution. Like, if they're too poor to eat bread, let them eat cake, which is what we're seeing with him. And like, I thought the irony of this was Kamala Harris went down when she was in Guatemala. Actually, had somebody commission cookies with her likeness on it, and she was giving out cookies to people with her that looked like her. And I'm like,
this is what I hear. I hear this.
And so I was laughing, and the first thing I thought of is like, the too poor to eat bread, let them eat cake. And let them eat cake. Here's the picture with on. I'm like, dude, it's the French Revolution, man. This is Marie Antoinette.
Well, and we saw it here right off the bat. Like, so obviously, previous to the actual shit show, they closed all outdoor venues and stuff. So like a year ago, this place closed in March, right? So they closed early, blah, 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 because of the pandemic. And then there was an announcement this past summer that was made that Altair Ski Resorts, which owns Mammoth Mountain, made some massive financial donations to some democratically supported organizations. And I mean millions. And we were like, shit, that's a bold move. We're like, wonder why they did that. Imagine that in state purple in California, the only thing that stayed open was the ski resort. So our entire town was shut. Couldn't have hotels, couldn't have Airbnbs. Our ski hill never closed. And it's like, that's an interesting move. So from a business perspective, you're like, good on you for paying to keep the mountain open. But at the same time, you're like, that's all it took to cure or to fight away a pandemic was money. Is that really it? Like, I could have cured COVID with $1 million. That's
but how do you keep Mammoth open without the infrastructure and the ancillary businesses around it? Like if the grocery store isn't open, their grocery store is not open. I mean, there's I don't even. I mean, are there hotels? Yeah, there has to be hotels in Mammoth.
You know how they did it? This will blow your mind. This is such classic bullshit. So an uber liberal workaround. So the rule with the hotels was they couldn't be, once they were allowed to be open a little bit, they couldn't exceed 40% occupancy. But 40% occupancy is done weekly. in California and a lot of places. So whatever your weekly occupancy represents, that 40%, the hotels just started closing Mondays and Tuesdays and having full occupancy on the weekend. Nice.
That's a good job.
Yeah, good job. I mean, it's it's
crazy.
No, I mean, it's like you said, like, yeah, you enjoy a good conspiracy, as do we. But at the end of the day, I think it's opportunists. You know, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, think about the riots or, you know, people going down and protests or whatever. You're going to have people that are there legitimately to protest something, but you're going to have a whole bunch of people that are standing in the back just waiting for a bottle to break so they can shatter a window and go in and get a whole bunch of fucking Air Jordans or, you know, Coach purses or this. I mean, there's in every situation, man, you're always going to have opportunists that are waiting for this shit to go down so that they can go in and fucking, and, you know, make money and you know, somehow come up on this whole deal.
Yeah, in California, down south, there was actually some legit crews that followed those riots. Some video came out, and you guys probably saw it, but these vans would roll up, and they would use circular saws, and these guys were good, and they were just, as soon as the riot erupted, they hit a bunch of surfboard shops, and they just cut a square doorway right in the brick side of buildings. Another crew would pop it out like a bank robbery crew, right? Guy would cut, another guy would pop the bricks, the guy would have the van waiting, shuttle all the surfboards into the back of the van or whatever they were stealing, and boom, on to the next. And when they caught them on video, they're like, holy shit, these guys, like, they're pros. And they were hitting every place like that for tens of thousands of dollars. But because it was in the guise of civil unrest, no one ever got in trouble for it. But these guys weren't there for protests, man. They were pros, like legit pros.
Well, I mean, you saw the video down on 3rd Street Promenade when everything erupted. I mean, they were just literally just taking bricks, throwing through, and just everything was looted.
Yeah. You know, I remember making a joke one time because this kid, young kid, was like running down the street, and he had 5 guitars, right? He had stolen 5 electric guitars. And I remember like making the joke, and it probably went over like a lead balloon, but I was like, I hope this kid is the next Jimi Hendrix, because it's like, if you're going to do that, make it worth it.
Yeah.
You know?
Nah, they went straight on eBay, dude.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
It just
right on Facebook
sold
Marketplace.
The shit, never, you know, went back to playing Guitar Hero and fake music. Right. Yeah.
So this year at Summer Strong, you changed it up a little. Instead of giving a deep, esoteric, you know, thought-breaking, groundbreaking, you know, observations and normal Derek Woodske talk, you decided to go and put a little practicality and bring back some very excellent, like, nutrition supplement recommendations, things that, like, you know, are well established and really brought that. What was the feedback? Did people really enjoy it?
I believe so. I think for, like, initially, it was the most positive feedback I've ever gotten post-speech. So in terms of, like, within the realm of Summer Strong, it's the most interaction I got after a presentation where people were like, well, what about this? Or how could I do that? Or what do you think of this? Or have you ever experienced that? So that was interesting. And probably because it was a relatable subject in that regard. Whereas if I'm talking about goal setting after the fact, people maybe aren't so keen to ask you questions because it's such a heady conversation that it's hard to sometimes articulate what it is about goal setting that you want to ask a question about, because it can be weird for some people. Whereas if you're talking about, you know, integrating a micronutrient that we saw to be supportive of muscle gain, pretty much anybody can be like, well, how do I do that tomorrow? Right. So when I look at it from that perspective, it was a lot more fulfilling because I feel like retrospectively, I was able to actually provide a service, not just provide, you know, used time. So that part of it was interesting. The thing that was kind of curious about it, though, were 2 questions I got afterwards from 2 different people, but it was the same concept. Why didn't I speak about CBD? I thought that was very interesting because that would be a question that would have never come up 5 years ago. So, why didn't you speak about CBDs in regards to nootropic human performance?
Man, I would not. I don't know. I wouldn't put CBD. I mean, I know Kyle Turley would definitely, venomously disagree with me. But I like this. I'm probably gonna get myself in trouble on this. I think the CBD thing. I think the jury's still out on that. I mean, I think there's some really interesting stuff, but all the research, especially when I looked at it with when Kyle sent me all this stuff, all the greatest effect of CBD was when it was with THC. So like the CBD effect was, was good. And, they, saw like there was a bunch of different stuff, but it was like tenfold when you start doing with THC. And that to me makes a little more sense in the grand scheme of things.
Well, and so it made me start thinking, I'm like, okay, so I know that there can be euphoria in some strains. There can be focus in some strains with THC-based consumption or in the CBDs that come with it. And I know there's some, stuff that shows, anti-inflammatory, and, you can go down that road. And for the most part, it has to be smoked and now can be consumed, but blah, blah, blah. So when I think about like sports supplementation, I'm always thinking, okay, in the simplistic form, I would, and this is again, probably get smoked for this by saying it, but from a pure performance-based understanding, it almost seems like there's more of a correlation to psilocybin microdosing from a consumable standpoint than even CBD in terms of human performance. And so like,
whoa. So microdosing psilocybin for human performance, are you talking about physical or like a mental?
So both? Like more from potentially both, but definitely from a nootropic standpoint. So, wow. When you're looking at some of these guys, and again, I think it's still one of these, never having been a psilocybin guy, so I can't speak from it personally, but like the same as THC, it's like you read all the information, you look at all the feedback that people are giving, and then you make the decision. And like, so the psilocybin stuff is, it's like all the fighters and all the high altitude mountaineers are microdosing psilocybin, and especially high altitude mountaineers. And now is it a cultural thing or is it a performance thing? And that's kind of the same argument I have for CBD. Is it a social cultural belief that it's effective, or is it actually improving human performance? And and this is where I have to draw the line. And even as much as I may disagree with this line at times, until the governing bodies no longer ban or control the consumption of psilocybin, THC, or CBD in the sporting world, how will we ever really know?
We won't. It's so that's what I was going to get. Like it's so anecdotal where, you have a Turley on and he's, talking about how it did this. I took it and I'm like, maybe whatever's wrong with me isn't what's wrong with you. Maybe it unlocks, maybe it's very specific, but it's hard to say that like universally everybody has the same effect. Like, I can drink a pot of coffee and go to sleep. Like coffee doesn't really affect me in the same way. But yet I still, like coffee still, I think I just process it way quicker. I know, Luke, for example, would drink a coffee and 2 days later, he was still up. He processed it slowly, but at the end of the day, we know that caffeine is a performance enhancer. I mean, I was laughing when you were talking about caffeine, but the age-old aspirin, caffeine, ephedrine
little stack.
That we used to use. It was aspirin, the
caffeine,
trucker speed.
ephedra.
Yeah, it was the trucker speed and then a no dose. And like those three were I mean, shit, that was our pre-training aid in college.
That was Dan Duchesne, right? Wrote about it in his little black book of anabolics. He wrote about the ECA stack for fat loss, right? Like that was a product for years at GNC. You could buy a product in a white bottle with red writing that just simply said ECA stack.
And you used to also be able to buy, what is it? The stuff that makes you sleep. And they basically outlawed it because
melatonin.
No,
GHB.
GHB. So they used to sell GHB at health food stores, and it was a capful to help you sleep. The problem is, if you gave somebody else a capful, they were fucking knocked out, and people were getting raped on it. But you would go in and you would see GHB, and they were making it. And I remember, God, I can't remember. We tried some, and it like came in a bottle, whatever. You took a capful. You better not have anywhere to go for 7 or 8 hours, because I woke up and was like, what happened? Like, it was legitimately, and people started getting raped and putting in drinks, and then they banned it. But I mean, that was like all the bodybuilders were drinking that stuff left and right because they could get like, the equivalent of 6 or 8 hours of sleep in a 3-hour time period because you slept so deeply. So hard. Oh, dude, GHB is, that's one of those things where
it was not uncommon. Yeah, for someone to take GHB and end up with no teeth, because when it kicked in, they just fell flat on their face. Yeah. Like there was horrific stories coming out of college. These kids are just like, Jesus, smashed my teeth out on the coffee table. Because when it was on, it was on. Yeah,
you better make sure you were laying down. I mean, but man, that's so with this. I mean, you had a bunch of different supplement recommendations, and I think the interesting one.
I want to jump in where John's talking about. Derek, you provided on your website the opportunity to read through the slides. So those that want to follow along with John's about to say, we have Eco-bolic.com, ECOBOLIC.com.
Yeah, so Derek spoke at Summer Strong a couple weeks ago and gave a great talk, basically going back to kind of his roots a little bit with the Poliquin Institute and discussing, different supplement routines for performance, muscle gain, and whatnot. And it was funny because it's things that at least I had always heard, and there were things in there that I had forgotten. I was like, oh, I forgot about, phosphocetyl or what is it?
Choline? Serine or choline?
Yeah, the serine, the one that, before sleep, to reduce inflammation. So, I mean, there was some cool ones that I just hadn't thought of, and I was like, ooh, I forgot about that one. Wrote it down and was like, I got to go mess with that.
Well, the one we talked about post presentation is good old-fashioned creatine monohydrate.
That is,
And, and the big thing that people, they didn't realize creatine's been around literally forever. It was I can't remember his name. I think it's Michael something. He was a French chemist that basically was able to separate it in the 1800s. Like, it has been around forever. But the other thing is how creatine monohydrate affects the rate in which a neuron fires through giving it ATP.
Yep.
And what they have discovered, in bad press, it lasts a lot longer than good press, it seems, because people still don't realize that it is brain protective.
Yeah,
and it totally is. Like, they were using it for second stage TBI injuries. And to be honest with you, it's like, I forgot about some of that stuff until I was like, okay, what is my presentation? There are a number of things I think are really important. And I'm like, creatine monohydrate's essential. I talk about that. It doesn't get enough actual real conversation. And it was when I was going over my speaker's notes from a long time ago that I was like, oh, that's right. There's a host of reasons that a lot of these micronutrients and amino acids are used that are really relevant today that I totally forgot about. Because, a lot of times you only ever speak from it on a growth perspective. Like, how do I take this and get bigger and better? How do I take this and get stronger and faster? And then you realize, oh, there's a backside to a lot of these things that people should be using just to be healthier and live longer.
The creatine monohydrate, and I get at least a question a week asking about, and it's so funny, people are like, well, do you cycle on and off it? And my comment is, like, it's not a fucking steroid. That's like cycling off red and, like, hey, I'm doing a cycle of red meat. And then like, oh, well, what about this? I'm like, I might be one of the longest continuous creatine users on the planet. 1990 was when Zengus gave it to us. And I've taken, 5 grams twice a day since then. And the research is only within the last 10, maybe even just 5 years has come out, like the effects within the brain and the neurological, and the neuroprotectant aspect and the ATP. I mean, I said, years ago, and I've said on this podcast ad nauseum, that every vertebrae on this planet should be taking creatine. And, it doesn't matter if you're, a little kid or an adult or whatever. I mean, people are like, oh, supplements for kids. I'm like, I put a little in my kids' stuff all the time. If they're going to put a shake, I always put a little teaspoon in there for them. And it's just smart. And it's just amazing that people are still asking about cycling it and loading it and this. And I'm like, fuck, stop overcomplicating. Just put a little bit in your shake in the morning and take a little bit before night and you'll be fine.
Well, and isn't that the truth? Like, so many people are looking for the shortcut, right? Like, how, and obviously that's why anabolics and, growth peptides and all these different things that have come into, basically the public reality recently in regards to peptides are so popular because they think that they're going to shorten the process. And to some degree, I guess you could argue that anything that speeds up restoration potentially shortens the process if you train really hard. So you can go from doing 2 sessions a day, instead of 1, and over the course of 4 years, you do twice as much work. So 2 clones compete. The clone that handles more work does better. Like, there's that whole argument to it. But what people don't realize is that it's still extremely short-sighted in the fact that they put all this energy into the concept of anabolics or peptides or this or that. And it's like, okay, so you're going to shorten your window and maybe get to like Jacksville super fast, but your personality still dictates that you're going to be gone in 2 years anyway. Right. And so what I started to realize when I was going through the presentation and how I wanted to present it was that, okay, how do I speak about these things to a group of people that are in this for the long haul? Anabolics are not as irrelevant. How do I speak to people that, are going to be lifting weights 10 years from now, or people that actually give a shit about this? And it's not going to be like a flash in the pan fitness chick who gets lean for 2 years and then vanishes. And so that's when I really decided to get away from like the product side of a sports supplement talk. And that's when I decided to go, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk about micronutrients that you could buy from, I don't care who. You can combine them in products if you want to, but like, why do you take phosphatidylserine? Why is tyrosine so important? Why
or
do
taurine.
Animals that,
I mean,
taurine,
dude, and what's crazy is I have 3 huge bottles of 1,000 milligram taurine pills that were sitting in my in the pantry. And like, for some reason, I just stopped taking them, and I was like, 4 grams a day. Right. And so now, and I was like, let's throw those back in. I got them sitting here. And like, that's what I loved about it. It reminded me so much of like, because I think we are constantly like looking like, what's the next big thing or what's this? And you forget that like you said, there's this whole micronutrient. And then the other thing, and I always bring this up, Dr. Tom Incledon made this statement to me years ago. He said that if we were to go back in time 100 years, the level of nutrient density and the amount of micronutrients in food was like 10 to 20 fold. He goes, off of the same eating and the same workouts, you would be dramatically in better shape, healthier, and more jacked. He goes, the problem that we're running into is that the food is so depleted of nutrients that 10 ounces of steak 100 years ago was dramatically different than this 10 ounces in these vegetables and this. Yep. So now what we're having to do is go back and almost backfill for our basically shitty, low micronutrient, based food. Yeah, dense foods. Yep. And it's just not the case. And he's like, the amount of food allergies that people are developing to these foods like didn't exist 100 years ago. Like the fact that, we have people today that, like for me example, gluten in bread and these, I mean, he's like, dude, like nobody had these issues. Like these weren't everybody drank milk, everybody had eggs, everybody ate this stuff. Yep. And he really goes back. He goes like it was a change in the gut biome and all these other extraneous factors. But I mean, just being able to go back and say, hey, we know that the food's not as nutrient dense, so these are why these supplements become so important. Is really like that was the strength of that whole deal.
No, and I agree 100% with that. And it's like, as someone that was a college athlete, I can remember. Living on hot dogs and garbage, right? Like there was periods where the food was terrible because I either had no money or, I was a lazy kid that wasn't living at home where my mom was a fantastic cook. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, geez, what do I make? Well, I guess I'm going to just cut up some cheap burger and like have patties for the 7th time this week, And so when you're talking to a group of up and coming athletes, and I don't care if they're tested athletes or not, the fundamentals are the same. If you want to be Mr. Olympia, and your goal is to do everything that you can in that moment to be as big and as strong as possible, you have to understand that there's still going to be giant gaps that you can't control. If the soil that, your potatoes are growing in has changed so dramatically that they're now not as nutrient dense, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You have to fill those gaps in. And I gave examples like full admittance, I don't just use Thorn, right? Even though I was able to work with Thorn to get people a good discount on them. And I think they're a cut above the vast majority of supplement companies out there. I still use a variety of different supplements for different reasons. Like I know I like to take a lot of carnitine. The only way I can afford to take the amounts of carnitine that I think are effective is I have to use Now Nutrition, and they have a sport liquid form because it is 3 grams per tablespoon or teaspoon. I can't remember. It's 15 milliliters, whatever that is, tablespoon, I think. And, so I have to use theirs because I can't afford to go through a bottle of a higher end carnitine, even though I know the purity level is probably a 99.98 instead of a 97.5. So you have to figure out and if I could tell people, it's like, you have to supplement if you have gaps. And a friend of mine, Dr. Fionnuala McHale from Ireland, once said to me, she goes, the best part about testing your body for deficiency is so that you don't take a bunch of everything, you take a whole lot of a few things. And that's what they realized is if you can figure out what you need, sometimes if I'm a poor methylator of B vitamins, like my genetic testing finally came back and shown that. I knew I was because my urine smells like asparagus when I eat it. So I know that I don't methylate B12 in particular
you and me both.
very well.
And I'm always low in B vitamins.
And I had a couple things would show up in blood work. I had chronically elevated RBC, which is a sign that you don't methylate B12 very, very well. Another sign is from birth. I was a kid that got canker sores, the little irritations in the mouth, not the herpes, but the other one, right? And
Tex?
The herpes came way later.
Do you remember that story about you told me about the second time you got herpes?
Yeah. Keep going, Derek.
Okay. And so I had all these red flags, but I had no reason why, right? Or the fact that you would look at some of my blood work and other markers were off. So I realized that I have to invest in an expensive B vitamin typically to offset that because they're typically like a higher grade methylated B vitamin. As soon as I start taking it, canker's gone, RBC stabilizes, energy goes up, blah, blah, blah. So I understand that, people can't just, shotgun it and spend millions of dollars on supplements, but I will tell people, figure out what you need the most or what you think you need, and supplement those just a touch higher than everything else. I'm not using everything that I put in my presentation. I don't think any human possibly could, but I gave you a ton of information so you can go through and start to pull things at different times that you might need. Like if you're going into a max effort cycle of training that's going to be 4 to 6 weeks long, dollars to donuts, you're going to have to upregulate the nootropics related to dopamine production because you're going to be depleting that aspect of your mental reserve, for a lack of a better word. And you can't replace all of that through, taking an ounce of CBD oil and sleeping. It doesn't work that way. CBD doesn't convert to, phosphatidylcholine. Like as much as I wish it did, it doesn't. I can't smoke glutamine into my body. I'm going to have to actually go and get that product.
And glutamine's another one where, so they pretty much came out with a bunch of studies that glutamine was shit for muscle building, that it had no effect on muscle. And the thing that I laughed about was we never took glutamine for muscle. Like Like that's the hilarious part. So glutamine gets his bad rap because it's shitty. It doesn't have any effect on building muscle. And I'm like, glutamine had a whole bunch of other things that were benefit. Why you take a scoop of creatine, a scoop of glutamine, and there were other effects for glutamine. So it's funny that like all of a sudden one thing gets being, like that doesn't matter. And all of a sudden people like sway away from it. And you're like, but that's not what glutamine did. So
no. And being one of the most abundant amino acids in the body, the one thing that people forget about glutamine, especially in its ability to heal the lining of the stomach, the other thing that glutamine does, and it was either a Dr. Serrano article from, I swear to God, 20 years ago, or somebody like that. They were talking about glutamine consumption, and I'm having to dig in the old file folder here because I haven't thought about this in about 20 years. There was a study that was done with glutamine, and it was used in burn wards to increase the rate in which skin tissue regenerated in burn patients. And so what they discovered with glutamine is if you could increase glutamine either maybe intravenously in those studies at a oral solution, I can't remember, but their skin grew back faster. So even if you're not going to look at muscle growth or regeneration, well, let's have at least a collagen conversation, right? Like, what about the stuff that holds everything together? What about the rate in which tissue restores? And there was so much that doesn't get talked about. Like, everybody wants to talk about performance enhancement, but no one wants to talk about the fact that if you take hydroxyproline and vitamin C and glycine, wound healing and collagen formation increases so quickly that all of a sudden you could have an argument that connective tissue recovery between bouts of or exposures to high stress is going to increase. And so it's like, well, yeah, it's not flashy, and God knows you're not going to feel it working, but you make your whole, and this is where it becomes such a problem. You make your whole career playing football, and you're one of the guys that never had an ACL, never had a tendon ligament issue, but you were one of the guys like yourself, say, instead of creatine, had been adamant about taking the collagen formulating amino acids every single day. It's like, well, were you lucky, or were you just bulletproofed a bit?
Man, I wish I had known about glutamine for connective tissues. I mean, we have I don't know if you know, Derek and I are brothers for both having ruptured patellar tendons. You can see ACL.
We're like the two G.I. Joe twins that had scars on opposite faces. Right? Do you remember that guy?
Yeah. So you're the right side, I was the left. But like, that would have been a nice piece of been like, hey, make sure you increase some glutamine because that will increase healing. But I'll tell you, I didn't get real jiggy until the supplementation stuff until, it had to be 01 when all of a sudden
I was late.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we've talked about this on the podcast numerous times, that the way that we got our supplement recommendation were like the bro recommendations. Hey, bro, what are you taking? I'm taking this. And then we would take it and like, hey, if I'm not low in copper and this dude's low in copper, he's going to be feeling great and I'm going to be feeling like nothing. So it wasn't until I started getting my blood work done and more importantly, getting the micronutrient testing done and then sitting with a doctor who understood like a Serrano or Tom Incledon and being like, hey, okay, this is what I'm seeing. These are the different pathways. These are the supplements we use to manipulate this stuff. And, like that to me, and I think you brought up a great question. One of my things that I never said is, hey, I had this tendon issue. I've torn an ACL. Is there anything that I can take that's going to, increase connective tissues? I mean, we were buying the gelatin packs, at the supermarket and then mixing those up. And I was drinking those twice a day because I want to say it was either Amaro or Charlie Francis deal. I think it was Amaro said, hey, go to the store, buy just the gelatin, the Jello, and just mix up like the Jello and drink that twice a day in a shake. And he's like, that increases connective tissues. And then, that was one that was pretty low hanging fruit.
It was low hanging fruit. You're consuming pig hooves, for lack of a better description, and that's what it's predominantly made out of. But the body has a funny way of taking what it needs from those things. It's the same reason why even some of the top supplement companies in the medical field are still putting bovine adrenal cortex in adrenal supplements. Like, to me, it doesn't make sense. It seems archaic, but they're still doing it for a reason. And this isn't bro science. No one's going to GNC to buy, adrenal bovine, right? This is like the medical grade high-end supplement. So there's a correlation to how some of that stuff works. And I was about the same time. I went and met Poliquin as an athlete in 02 with Judd. And that's probably when I really kind of realized there was more to supplements than a protein shake,
Sure.
So it was about that same time, but it wasn't until I couldn't heal the hole in my leg. And that would have been 15 that I really went down a rabbit hole where I learned everything I could possibly understand about how to change collagen matrix formulation. And so that's something I never talked about with Poliquin. It was well beyond the Poliquin days. I never talked about it on my podcasts. I didn't even talk about it at Summer Strong, because I could have given a presentation just on collagen formation supplementation and how I started to formulate concepts going back to like Linus Pauling studies on how to heal holes in arteries in cardiovascular disease patients. And I took that information and I started to take it and work with it to heal this non-healing wound in my leg. And in my initial attempt at doing that, I wasn't even consuming the amino acid matrix that I was using, as I was taking Manuka honey, which is an antimicrobial honey, mixing it in a paste with glycine hydroxyproline and literally putting that paste inside the hole in my leg. And so that was my first attempt at trying to heal this non-healing wound. And it worked pretty good. You could start to see the development of new tissue along the wound edge. And then that took me down this deeper rabbit hole where I started to look at, okay, so it's not just enough to take the amino acids, but you have to take the amino acids in presence of ascorbic acid, and all these other variables got involved because they all work synergistically to actually formulate collagen. And if one of those things is missing, then what happens is you have an abundance of certain amino acids, but you're not getting the same rate of upregulation if your diet is inadequate. And when I started to go down that road and realized that if I took this combination of certain amino acids in a certain environment, I started to see a dramatic change in how the wound was starting to close and heal. And for people that don't realize this, I was like full on Denver hospital, hyperbaric chamber patient with the cancer patients for like a month, every day for like 3 hours in this hyperbaric chamber, because they legitimately thought they might have to amputate the back half of my leg. And so I was
this because of MRSA? Well, I mean, was this
you know what it was, dude? It was when I re-ruptured the Achilles tendon. So I had an Achilles tendon rupture in 4 weeks, about 3.5 weeks to my surgery. I was in a freak accident that should have never happened, and it re-ruptured a healing Achilles surgery. And so everything that went well the first surgery went wrong the second in terms of bacteria and non-healing. And they went and used midline suture that was a little bit different. They used a bovine, a pig, so it's like porcine or whatever the word is. They used a pig graft to reconstruct my tendon. And dude, it just became a year of open wound. Like you could every single day for 6 months, wound treating at home, I actually had to physically look at my Achilles tendon. Like I'd be like, oh, I'm rubbing my Achilles tendon again. And it became so normal that, and what they told me, what was really interesting is they said, if the tendon gets exposed to air, you will absolutely lose it. That's what they told me over and over. And I was looking at it. I could see it. I could strum it. And so I was like, I'm in deep shit. And so I was doing, like, trying to find any way possible to heal this open wound. They were getting ready to remove the whole back of my leg. And what that would have meant is they would have removed the fucking Achilles tendon, and they completely let the skin close up and heal. Then like a year later, they would have taken the hallucis longus out of my big toe and tried to reconstruct the tendon out of it. That's what they do in that situation. I would have been straight fucking fucked, right?
Yeah,
so I was like, I got to find a solution. And so what's really crazy is kind of right near the end, of the of the hyperbaric wound care treatment, the doc, who was really a good dude, he was the head of the center, came in. He's like, yeah, he goes, we're kind of at our wit's end. You're not making any progress. And I'm like, well, what's the issue? I know you've stripped out the midline suture. That was a horrific experience. We've done all this stuff. What do we do? And he's like, well, he goes, it's the inflammation. He goes, the wound starts to close, but the inflammation won't let it shut. And we need it to make, as weird as it sounds, need the tissue to make contact for it to finish. And I'm like, well, what do we do? And he goes, you need a lymph massage therapist to start massaging the lymph out of the wound. And that's when a light went off in my head. So I'm like lymph massage. So it's an inflammation issue. And my whole back of my leg looked like a wax candle. It was disgusting. And so I went home and I thought about it for an hour, and I'm like, oh, I got a solution. I know what I'm going to do. So I get onto this UK website, and the topical cream Tramel for arnica inflammation.
Yeah.
Well, outside of the United States, you can buy it in an injectable, and it's really common.
They used to inject Tramel into my shoulder to reduce inflammation from the torn infraspinatus, so that I would get that injected in.
It's a great product. So I went on, bought like a couple boxes. It comes in, and I'd started to do some research into the peptide world. So back then, BPC 157 wasn't available, but TB 500 was. And so I got TB 500. I bought the Tramel injectable. And this is going to sound horrific, but every day for 2 weeks, twice a day, I would inject around the wound and inject inside the wound with roughly 4 milliliters of Tramel mixed with TB 500. And at the end of 2 weeks, the leg was completely palpable again. If you're in the massage world, it was like tissue should feel. And the wound had closed. It hadn't healed, but it closed. And I remember going in for a hyperbaric, and he just looked at it and he was like, well, what changed? And I told him, and he's like, oh, and he just kind of sighed, right? Because it was so far outside the scope of practice. And he's like, he goes, I can't work with that. And he kind of laughs, and then he leaves, and then he comes back and he just set a piece of paper down, and he's like, hey, just write that down for me. And so I wrote it down, what I did. And like he said, he goes, the funny thing about the medical system in America, one of the biggest financial drains on the medical system is non-healing wounds in hospitals, because they can tell you how it heals. They can tell you if it's healing, but they can't tell you how long it's going to take or if it'll heal completely. And that was kind of a mind blower for me. And so I healed the hole in my leg with a combination. I think the high dose collagen formulating aminos I was using was keeping the tendon from dying, right? Well, that open wound should have killed it. And then it was the, not medical, obviously, the Tramel and the TB 500 is what I used to close a year-long non-healing wound.
Wow.
It was fucking crazy. Man. And I had stem cells in there too. I even had stem cells up at the Stedman clinic. Didn't do it.
I wish they had, when I ruptured my patellar tendon, probably saying that they had the BPC 157. I mean, I would have been like, I would have just been like, hey, let me just send everything. And I would have just injected it in. I mean, the effects of that, I mean, just even the oral in terms of like healing the gut lining and that, like, that's,
it's
like
incredible.
That should be standard practice for like you're coming out of like orthopedic surgery and something like, just teach somebody, give them a little insulin syringe, teach them to do a whole bunch of localized rejections around it and just keep pumping that stuff in.
Yeah, and Tramel, you can drink it, right? So it's really benign. And I was going to an IV place after the fact. And so this is even after the leg's fully healed. And I would get, a standard Myers cocktail with increased vitamin C and maybe a glutathione. And so I've always, people are getting like just boners left and right over IVs right now. And it's like the people that they knew about that in the early 2000s. Like none of this is new. It's just now become available. So people that are like, oh, have you heard? And it's like, heard. I'm like, I can't believe it's taken this long for people to realize how beneficial IV vitamins are compared to oral vitamins. It's just, it's expensive, right? So, but when I would go to my IV doc, I remember going in one day and I'd been smashed from overseas travel. Like my face was swollen. I was beat to shit, probably eating way too much airport food. And so I go in to get my IV and I just handed her a bottle of the Trammell and she's like, are you sure I can put this in? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, it's intramuscular, intravenous, or oral. And so she runs the bag and does everything. And then just like a glutathione push, she puts that Trammell through the IV and she's like, do you feel okay? And it took about probably 3 to 5 seconds. And I just got a burst of this like floral scents in my mouth. Just like the way B vitamins will kind of make you taste it. And that's the thing. Trammell is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory made from floral essence. And it literally felt like I was breathing a flower vase. It was bizarre. But man, talk about systemic anti-inflammatory. Like there's so much that we just don't do.
No, I when I got sick with that cedar fever, which is funny because that's actually the sickest I've ever been. I hope to God it was COVID. I got tested for COVID. I just kept getting testing, hoping. I hope to God this is COVID because I'll tell people it's not. It's fucking legit. And it was actually that cedar fever when I cut down 60 cedar trees.
I remember you telling me that. Oh,
dude, it fucking got me. And I went to go get, Parsley set me up, and I went to go get an IV, and they hit me with, was it NAC?
And acetylcysteine.
Yeah, they hit me with like, and they're like, this might make you feel sick, and I'm like, I don't get sick, dude. Yep. And they hit me with that, and it was like just this, basically anything they could dump in that bag. And I think it helped a little bit, but man, that cedar fever fucking, I think I was, I've never been that sick. I remember I was laying in bed thinking like, fuck, like if I die in the middle of the night, like what's going to happen? It was that sick.
It's like a Doors, best of the Doors, This Is the End is playing on loop somewhere in your world. Right?
Oh, dude. I don't think I've ever been that sick. And I just remember thinking like, God, I hope this is COVID. So at least I can get on here and tell people, being like, hey man, like, say what you want, that COVID fucking made me sick. But I'll tell you this, after having cedar fever, I can't even imagine. Like that was awful.
Well, it's funny, obviously, like Megan got vaccinated for her work that she does, and she got so this is no bullshit because full disclosure, I'm vaccinated too. So I'm not saying this as to discourage people or be that guy, right? But Megan got so fucking sick from that vaccine. I can't describe it. She had 104 fever for 3 days or 2.5 days. Jeez. So it's like she had COVID. She had a cough. She had chest tension. Like she got smashed. She was in the morning after her second vaccine shot.
Which one did she get? The J&J or with Pfizer?
She was Pfizer. Yeah. So she was like delirious. So I was scared shitless about the vaccine. I'm not even going to lie because I'm my own worst enemy with stuff like that. But I'm like, okay, so my dad, all that stuff back home. I'm like, if something happens to my old man, I could never forgive myself to say that the reason I couldn't get across the border to Canada with the ridiculous draconian rules is because I didn't have a vaccine. Right? Like for me, that was the reason why I got vaccinated. No bigger agenda. It was very simple. And so I was dreading. Dude, like my shoulder didn't even get sore. So it was weird to see such crazy different reactions to the vaccine even. And, it was funny. So I'm a religious blood donor because I'm B positive, which is a really small percentage of people that are B positive blood. And so, for years I've donated blood every whatever it is, 3 months, like to the day I donate. And so I've always done that. And I don't know if people realize this, they started testing for antibodies for COVID for free in your blood because they're looking for plasma donors about a year ago. And man, I just kept, no matter if I got sick, I thought I had COVID, blah, 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 just always negative. My antibodies were always negative. And I had told myself, if it ever comes back and I'm positive for the antibodies, I'm going to forgo the vaccine. And I'm not a doctor, don't get me wrong. So I could be a total dickhead with the statement, but my belief has always been, if you're, antibody positive, you should probably hold off on getting the old vaccine until we know what's going on. Right.
Sure.
whatever that is. So, but it just kept coming back negative. Like I was, praying for positives the same way and nothing. Like
same thing.
And
man. I've gone twice to get the antibody, 3 times on the antibodies, and it's always negative. And I got like we did the swab. I did this. I mean, I'm like, shit. Yep. Like, I don't know if it's that easy to get. I mean, maybe some people it is, but I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I washed my hands too many times.
Well, go down the whole tunnel of genetic components to this whole thing. I don't know. I think for as divided as people are emotionally on the topic, I think down the road we will see that, okay, there's some science to this. Like, I think I made the comment a year ago when I was on that, and I hate to say I told you so, we said that it was more than likely created. We were talking about that shit a year ago.
Well, and it was the protein barb. It was the protein barb.
Right.
So everything else looked like naturally occurring, other than the protein barb that they did in the lab to make it studied. It's like studyable, yep. And that's non-naturally occurring. And that guy who was that immunologist came out, and his email to Fauci is like, hey, that barb doesn't exist in nature. Like, this looks like, and he was going through like 99.9%. This looks like, naturally occurring, but this 1% makes it not. And then all of a sudden,
gain of function, right?
Yeah. And then all of a sudden he comes out and is like, oh, this isn't. And so he basically had to just delete all of his social media, and is basically now in hiding because they have his recorded being like, hey, this is it. And then him saying the exact opposite to the public. So, I mean, like in this, I mean, like that FOIA request, man, like, I mean, to go through, the one that just trips me out is for him to be like...
Do we know who asked for it? Like the Freedom of Information to read all these?
Oh, I don't know, but I'm amazed they gave it to him. I mean, we tried to do a Freedom of Information Act on our on our contracting for the National Guard, and they fucking basically told me to go fuck off. So it's pretty interesting that they released it, which makes you think somebody wanted that information to get out. But the fact that in there, Fauci says, and all of the emails... hydroxychloroquine helps and can prevent this, and they shit on that. And I'm wondering how many people died unnecessarily because they didn't want to support, Trump's, idea that this is going to work. And so, like, that's where I get real twisted on this shit, where I'm like, okay, so you're telling me tax-paying Americans who are guaranteed the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and all this were purposely misled because of your fucking political agenda.
Yeah, because your emotional knee-jerk reaction to what you think is best for your bottom line, and
so it's like okay, so if that's the case, isn't that some form of fucking treason? That like me as a tax-paying American, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all this good stuff, you're purposely keeping information that might have kept Americans alive, and nobody is talking about that.
Nobody's talking about it, and it takes a guy like that doctor out in California, who I think might be based in Austin now. I can't remember, Clark, I think his name is. I'm drawing a blank, but he's a TBI specialist, and he concluded it very cleanly. He said, okay, even if hydroxychloroquine was not what was actually kicking COVID's ass, what he drew the conclusion, he says, is hydroxychloroquine is an ionophore, which is a shuttling component for zinc, and zinc, for sure, we know, disrupted the coronavirus's existence. Sure. He said, so if someone had a good zinc status and was taking hydroxychloroquine or taking the hydroxy with the zinc, absolutely it was getting into the cell and disrupting the ability for the cell to exist in the body, the same way that curcumin or turmeric does. And it's like they discovered that treating TBIs by coincidence. So it's like, why couldn't you even just backtrack as a government and be like, okay, so here's the deal with hydroxychloroquine. It itself may not be that effective, but if you take it with zinc, wow. Like, how hard is it to have that simple conversation?
But I mean, and fuck, I hate the conspiracy. I think we always enjoyed like chewing and like joking about the conspiracy stuff. But at the end of the day, you're like, I don't know if there's a conspiracy on this one. Like the information that potentially could have saved lives was that was misrepresented, withheld, and actually fucking spun in a negative manner that could have helped save the lives of Americans.
Hammers him every time.
Like, nothing ever comes to light. And I think it's because the mainstream media just fucking buries it. And it's like, and if it's not present I'm like, at what point, like, I don't give a shit what side of the aisle you sit on this. As Americans in this situation, we should be provided with the best information that allows for the greatest outcome. And anything fucking less is fucking bullshit. And you shouldn't hold the power in this country where you can effectively make that, that distinction and that pivot and make that happen.
I agree 100%. It's, again, if it wasn't malicious on the front side, it sure seems like there were some people that realized the quickest way to fill a bank with money is to monopolize the fear and negativity of a bad situation. And I think that's where we're at again. There's people that love to prosper off of other people's fear. And it's chronic right now. It's chronic.
Well, I mean, every dystopian movie, from V for Vendetta and every one of these, I mean, like, it had like Escape from LA, Escape from New York. I mean, it all like fits within this. And it's, and people look at it and be like, oh, I'm like, dude, like, believe me, man, people have done terrible things to people in the name of ideology and, the greater good in this. And like the fact that, there was this, whether the political masters or the people that we somehow fucking elect to lead us view that, like, hey, we have to get rid of this individual, and so anything that he globs onto or any information he puts out or what is instantly fucking tinted as evil and bad. I mean, the fact, like, so what you're saying is that all that information, everything that Trump put out, because was bullshit. I'm like, come on, like,
give me a break. I saw a Far Side-ish like meme, and it's a father opening the door to his kid's bedroom and is like, hey, Junior, make sure to keep that new president accountable. And then it shows the kid sitting in front of a blank computer screen, and all it says is Orange Man gone, right? And you just realize it has nothing about accountability. It was a bunch of people that could identify or tribalize themselves on a concept. And once it's gone, they never cared about politics.
No.
They cared about the idea of being virtuous in the greater good of their social warriorism. And it's like, well, if you're not going to keep the fight up to keep the new guy accountable, just like you kept the old guy accountable,
he gets a pass on fucking everything.
What was the point of it all?
Dude,
like, what was the point of it all?
Like, they were running all the pictures of, like, Trump's keeping kids in cages, and nobody talks about the fact that Obama built those cages. And
or the fact that
Biden still has the cages. Like, where's the fucking outrage? Where's AOC going down there talking about this deal? I mean, now that it's Biden's fucking deal, but he didn't shut any of this shit down. He sent in Kamala Harris, who is by far the worst fucking person on the planet. And I know this because we're from California. I mean, nobody talks about how she got her job by blowing Willie Brown, and that came out in his divorce proceedings. And I mean,
great cookies.
She Monica Lewinsky'd.
She's
Monica Lewinsky.
Nobody talks about that, and she's down there basically telling him, "Don't show up, don't come. Here's a cookie with my likeness on. Get the fuck out of here."
Right?
Like
it's gross.
The media actually lambasted and fucking eviscerated Trump. And you know what? Like, there should be a watchdog. I mean, that should be all the president's men.
I agree.
That's Woodward and Bernstein. You have to fucking have the media as the third or another member of the government to keep people honest. But the problem is that isn't the case. You get fucking Biden. I mean, dude, did you hear his weird thing about talking about oh, you look so good with the ponytail, like saying a bunch of awkward shit.
You look like you're 19. Like standing on stage looking at an adolescent going, oh, you look so old with your pigtails or ponytails. I like how you cross your legs. You look like you're 19. At that point, one of the Secret Service should have been like, oh, we got to get this fucking sack of shit off the stage ASAP.
Nah,
because
they should have been
the rest of the world is about to like line up the guns.
And then what's crazy is that piece only came out in like clips. The media didn't cover it.
Nope.
Like,
No.
so then they just fucking bury this fucking shit. And I'm like, come on, like here's the deal, man. Like, I don't care what side that you sit on, but it has to be fair. If you're gonna fucking lambaste this dude on every side, then you get this dude on the that gets a pass. That's fucking bullshit. You know?
Bullshit. Like, just keep it honest, keep it fair. If it's gonna continue to be shitty, then just point out the shit, right? Like Kimmel referred to Florida as America's North Korea on live TV. What does that even mean? Like, that's disgusting, you know? But the people here refer to Bishop as Little Texas because it's a ranching, fairly conservative area of California. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, but one, they got that dope beef jerky place that we used to always stop at, and by far they
still there, man. Mahogany Meats, I think, something like that. Yeah,
dude, we used to swing by there. That was our stop. This is right on the or probably it's in the middle of town now. It was on the outskirts. But like we would always go down to Bishop on our way up. That's where we bought all of our groceries because it wasn't all fucked up like when you get to Mammoth.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
And it's just I don't know. Maybe it's the arrogance. Everybody always looking down the nose, and the fact that it was always the ski instructors and the people that worked in Mammoth are the ones that lived in Bishop.
Yes. And still, unfortunately, has become that way, right? Yeah, priced out.
Yeah, priced out.
Yeah.
What else we got, Mr. McQuilkin?
Final piece. Derek, you've started a new Instagram page, same name as your website, Eco-bolic, and you highlight some aspects. We have warrior, traveler, and I'm missing one, healer. Can you go into the ethos of that and what you're aiming to accomplish?
So oddly enough, I started that like back in 2017, but I was traveling so much, I just didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. So I kind of put it on ice. And it came to me, and what the idea was when I first thought of it was, outside of the name being kind of catchy, I was like, the one thing that I felt that was missing now that I was kind of away from sports professionally, collegiately, and the way that I saw social media going was there was like such a breakdown in that collective like camaraderie of like personal growth and like a bunch of people all kind of moving in the same direction, regardless of really what it was, towards just embetterment, like a frenzied desire to like just get good at something or to be a part of something that was holistically and full-heartedly trying to be great. And so I thought about what that meant to me, and and like everyone will see it and they'll probably like, is that like ecology, or is that like a global warming thing? It's like, well, no, it's like ecology as in the house or the unification of a family of things, and the idea that there's like an aggressive or growth from that unification of thought. And so when I sat down and started to like initially break it out, I looked at like the three aspects of what I thought made up the things that I was doing in life. Like the warrior represented like the physical manifestation of using our body in a way in which it was designed, to go out and seek physical struggle in a positive growth mindset, and then the healer comes from the fact that I spent so much time pursuing, soft tissue health, and obviously what we talked about earlier, nutritional health and supplementation, and then you could also kind of throw in spiritual health with that, I guess, too, depending on your belief systems, either, theology based or more cosmic based, depending on what people believe. It's not my place to judge. And then when I look at the last aspect is I spent a huge part of my adult life traveling the world. And we've talked about it on the podcast, like being a micro minority and having to learn how to adjust and fit in and become a part of a culture that I'm the one of 10 million, And so when I look at all those things, it's like, how can I bring this together? And, so like with the programs that are on there that people can get a part of, like fat loss and functional hypertrophy, that's just kind of tidbit stuff of different things I've done as a coach. And it's like, if I can't be there to show someone a workout, maybe I can show them workout examples that we did, and they can actually do it and physically like learn it as it goes. And I can kind of help out from a distance and guide and be like, okay, so this is why we wrote it this way. This is what the methodology was. This is an example. And it's like, yeah, it's 12 weeks, 24 weeks, 36 weeks. It's like, at the end of the day, it's still just an example of another type of training we did. With the supplementation stuff, it was really straightforward. I reached out to Thorne and Bub's Naturals, and I'm talking with UCAN now and just being like, okay, I can at least try to subsidize some of this information. Like, to be honest, a big part of it is like even the cost of the workouts or people that pay for, buy some supplements from Thorne. Instead of me going, hey, this is a product that I'm selling, it's like, if you guys subsidize the desire to be involved through these other means, it gives me kind of like the mental freedom to try to develop stuff without being like, okay, how do I develop the perfect workout that I can put a price amount and it has to result in this exact outcome? Instead, it's like, well, this is what we did, and I'm going to incorporate it into a structure so you can practice it and try to learn it. But the subsidy for it is going to be like, if you buy some Thorne supplements, eventually I'm going to get a kickback. So it's like trying to, I lost you. You're blacked out. Trying to figure some of that stuff out. So, at the end of the day, it's like trying to create an avenue for me to interact with people that there's just no way I can actually physically get in contact with, and just trying to bring them into the experiences that I've had as a coach and see if we can actually get a little bit better in the process.
And the return of some coffee talks.
Hey,
yep.
What you booked it for September? What are you doing in September?
September, I should be pretty free.
You want to come to Austin and come hang out with us? We're going to have
I'd love to come to Austin.
17, 18.
Yeah, 17th and 18th. We're going to have our like little Block 1 collective, and so we were sitting shooting around, be like, man, it'd be great to get you down here and just hang out and have some fun. And I think it would be always great to connect. So I didn't know if you're around.
Come down.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will book it. We'll
send
you the information.
I should probably I'll drag Megan to that since it'll be her birthday.
Oh, ooh, even better. Yeah. Austin's a great place for it. So I know, it'll be great. It should be a lot of fun. So, dude, awesome. Well, we'll book that one.
3 hours flew by. As always.
Dude, I like every time I talk to Derek, it's like 3 hours, and I feel like we just started talking.
I know, right? The only reason that I know it's been 3 hours is because I have to pee. That is the only thing that is giving me any
my
sense
stomach
of time.
Is growling. Like I'm hungry.
I could definitely eat as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, dude, thank you so much for being one of our most illustrious guests on Power Athlete Radio. And
well, good luck in your move.
Yeah. Good luck in the move.
Thank you.
I believe me, I'm still got a Zillow set up, so I'm still looking for you. Just because I love to like get up and look at real estate in strange places. Yeah. So hopefully some dope comes up. It's a beautiful
part of the world. Like, as much as I wish it could remain as wild as it was 20 years ago, I also wish that more people that are delusional about where they are in life right now, maybe they need to move to Montana. Maybe they need to just get away from all the bullshit,
Figure their shit out. Well, cool. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Derek, for being the inaugural guest in our brand new studio. We forgot to mention.
I'm so stoked to be the first guest in the studio.
Yeah.
Like, when I found that out, I was like, this is awesome.
Well, Ted text came out. He's like, hey, for the first one in the new place, we got to get somebody big. I'm like, is there anybody bigger than Derek Woodske? And I'm like, not as far as I know.
Is this number 4? Is this number 4?
Number 4, and we broke our own record for the length of the episode.
And not only that, but we also had the live Talk to Me, Johnny, that we did at the Sonesta a couple years ago.
Yep.
So that was
We've hit some
amazing.
home runs. This is a good group to be a part of.
Well, thank you.
I like being a part of the Power Athlete family.
Dude, we'd love to have you.
Oh, yeah. So we'll look forward to see you, Block Ones that are listening. We'll get to shake hands, fist bump with Derek, and talk about all the supplements you want in person.
Yeah. We'll be in touch with just more information, and look forward to seeing you soon, amigo, and be good.
Appreciate it greatly. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Freight train and I'm right on track. I'm smoking.